Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was about halfway through the drive when my headlights dimmed. Not completely off, just dimmed. Like something passed in front of them for a second. The road ahead went darker than it should have been, like the beam got swallowed up. Then it snapped back to normal. I slowed down a bit, instinctively, even though there was nothing there. No car, no animal, nothing crossing the road. I was on a stretch of road outside Hexham, heading back toward Newcastle. It was late, around 1:30 a.m., and the weather had turned earlier. Light rain, not heavy, but enough to make the road shine under the headlights. There weren't many streetlights out there, just long gaps of dark between the occasional dim orange ones. I remember glancing at my dashboard, thinking maybe something flickered with the battery or the lights themselves. Everything looked fine, so I kept driving. About 30 seconds later, it happened again. This time it lasted longer. The headlights dimmed and the road ahead didn't just get darker, it felt like it disappeared, like the beam stopped reaching as far as it should. I could still see the immediate road in front of me, but beyond that it was just black. Not normal night darkness. Heavier. I slowed down more, easing my foot off the accelerator. "Come on," I muttered, like the car could hear me. Then it snapped back again. Full brightness. Wet road reflecting the light like normal. I exhaled and gave a small laugh, mostly to calm myself down. Electrical issue, I thought. Old car, weird wiring, something like that. Still, I didn't speed back up. A few minutes passed without anything happening. The road curved slightly, lined with trees on both sides. Their branches leaned over in places, forming these dark tunnels where even the weak streetlights didn't reach. I started to relax a bit. Then I noticed something else. The sound. The rain had been lightly tapping against the windshield the whole time. Not loud, just steady. But at some point, it stopped. I didn't notice exactly when. I only realized because the silence felt wrong. I flicked my eyes up at the windshield. The wipers were still moving, slow and steady, but there was nothing for them to clear. No droplets, no streaks. The glass was dry. I glanced at the side mirrors. The road behind me still looked wet. I could see the faint sheen under my taillights. But ahead of me, it was dry, completely. I felt that same tightness in my chest again. I pressed the accelerator a little, wanting to get out of that stretch of road. That's when the headlights dimmed a third time. This time they didn't come back right away. The beam shortened again, cutting off a few meters in front of the car. Everything beyond that was just gone. Like the road ended in darkness. I slowed almost to a crawl. My hands were tight on the wheel now. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see further ahead, like that would help. And then I saw it. Not clearly. Just a shape. Something darker than the darkness, right at the edge of where the headlights stopped. It wasn't solid. Not like a person or an animal. More like a distortion, like heat rising off asphalt in the summer. Except it was night and cold. It stayed in place as I moved forward, or maybe I was moving toward it. I couldn't tell. The ringing in my ears started then, quiet at first, but noticeable. Same high-pitched tone you get from electronics sometimes, but there was nothing around. I eased my foot onto the brake. The car slowed even more. The shape didn't move. It didn't react. It just stayed there, right where the light ended. I felt this strong urge to stop completely. Not panic, not fear exactly, just this pull to not get any closer. But I was already too close. The car rolled forward another few feet. The headlights flickered, and for a split second, everything went completely dark. Not just ahead of me. Everything. No dashboard lights, no headlights, nothing. Just black. Then it all came back at once. The headlights were full brightness again. The dashboard lit up, the road stretched out ahead like normal, and the shape was gone. I hit the accelerator without thinking, pushing the car faster than I should have on a wet road, or what should have been a wet road. I glanced at the windshield again, still dry. The wipers kept moving uselessly, squeaking slightly now against the glass. I reached over and turned them off. The silence got heavier. No rain, no wiper noise, just the engine and that faint ringing, still there, just under everything. I checked the time, 1:47 a.m. That didn't seem right. I was sure it hadn't been that long since the first flicker. Maybe a few minutes, 10 at most. I tried to think back, to piece together how much time had actually passed, but it felt slippery, like trying to remember a dream right after waking up. I kept driving. A few more minutes passed, and then I saw headlights coming toward me in the opposite lane. A car, finally. Relief hit me harder than I expected. As the car got closer, I slowed slightly, watching it. It looked normal, just a hatchback, nothing unusual. But as it passed me, something felt off. The driver didn't look at me, not in the usual way people glance as they pass. He just stared straight ahead, completely still. And his headlights, they dimmed as they passed my car, same way mine had. Just for a second, I checked my mirrors quickly. The car kept going, taillights steady, no sign of anything wrong. I turned my attention back to the road ahead. The rain started again, light at first, then steady, tapping softly against the windshield. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Everything looked normal again. Wet road, full headlights, trees lining the sides. The ringing in my ears faded slowly until it was gone. I drove the rest of the way home without anything else happening. When I pulled into my driveway, I just sat there for a minute, engine running, staring at nothing. Eventually, I turned the car off and went inside. The next morning, I went back out to check the car. I don't know what I expected to find. Probably nothing. But when I looked at the headlights, I noticed something. Both of them had a faint smear across the glass. Not dirt, not water spots, just a thin, dull streak right across the center of each one. Same height, same position, like something had passed directly in front of them. I noticed it right under my boots. I'd been standing on the same flat rock for maybe half an hour, casting out into the lake and getting nothing back. It was early morning, just before sunrise, and there was still a bit of fog hanging low over the water. The place was called Bleatarn, up in the Lake District. Quiet spot. Not many people that early. I'd gone with my friend Aaron, but he'd wandered off further down the shoreline to try a different spot. So, it was just me, the water, and that low gray fog. I reeled in my line and looked down for a second just to check my footing. That's when I saw it. A faint glow in the water, right below me. At first I thought it was just the reflection of the sky starting to brighten, but the color was wrong. It had this dull, pale blue tone to it. Not bright, not lighting anything up, just there. I leaned forward slightly, peering down. The water was completely still. No wind, no ripples. It looked like glass. The glow stayed in one place for a few seconds, then it moved. Not drifting, not spreading. It slid straight out from under me, moving away in a clean line toward the center of the tarn. I froze, rod still in my hand. There were no ripples. That's what stood out immediately. Anything moving through water should disturb it. Even a fish near the surface makes something. This didn't. The surface stayed perfectly smooth as the glow passed beneath it. I stepped back off the rock without really thinking, boots crunching softly on the gravel behind me. The glow kept going. Same speed, same straight path. It didn't change size, didn't fade or brighten, just moved. I watched it for as long as I could until the fog swallowed it up further out. Then it was gone. I stood there for a minute, trying to process what I'd just seen. Probably just a fish, I muttered, but I knew that wasn't right. Fish don't glow like that, and they don't move like that either. I looked around for Aaron. He was maybe 50 meters down the shore, back turned, focused on his own line. I thought about calling out to him, but I didn't. I wasn't even sure what I'd say. I went back to the rock, stepped up onto it again, and looked down into the water. Nothing. Just dark, still water. I stayed there a while longer, casting again, trying to ignore it. A few minutes passed, then I noticed something else. The fog was moving, not across the water like normal. It was pulling, slowly in one direction toward the center of the tarn. It was subtle, but you could see it if you focused. Thin strands of mist drifting inward like something was drawing them in. I glanced back at Aaron. He hadn't reacted to it. I stepped down from the rock again and walked a few paces along the shore, trying to get a different angle. The water still looked flat. Too flat, like it wasn't reflecting properly. I crouched down, bringing my face closer to the surface. That's when I saw the glow again, further out this time. Same color, same dull blue. It appeared suddenly, like it hadn't been there a second ago. And then it moved. Straight line again. Not toward me this time, parallel to the shore. I followed it with my eyes, turning slowly as it passed. Still no ripples, no sound, just that silent movement under the surface. My chest felt tight. I straightened up, suddenly aware of how quiet everything was. No birds, no wind, just that stillness. The glow kept moving, then faded out again. I stood there, staring at the spot where it had disappeared. "All right," I said under my breath. "That's enough." I started walking toward Aaron. The gravel crunched under my boots, louder than it should have been. He turned when he heard me. "Any luck?" he asked. I shook my head. "You?" "Nothing." I hesitated. "You see anything weird out there?" I asked. He frowned. "Like what?" I gestured vaguely toward the water. "Just anything." He looked out over the tarn, squinting slightly. "Looks normal to me," he said. "Why?" "Thought I saw something," I said. "Probably nothing." He shrugged. "Fish, maybe." "Yeah," I said. We stood there for a bit, both looking out. Then it happened again. This time, both of us saw it, a faint glow appearing about halfway between us and the center of the water. Aaron leaned forward slightly. "You see that?" "Yeah," I said. We both watched it. It stayed still for a second. Then it moved. Straight toward us. I felt my stomach drop. It wasn't fast, but it wasn't slow either. Just steady. Closing the distance. Still no ripples. The surface of the water stayed perfectly smooth as it approached. Aaron took a step back. "What is that?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. The glow reached the shallows near the shore, right where the water met the gravel. Then it stopped. Just sat there, beneath the surface. A few feet from where we stood, we both stared at it. I could see it more clearly now. It wasn't a shape. It was more like a patch. Soft edges, slightly brighter at the center. It didn't illuminate the stones or the water around it. Just existed. The silence pressed in again, heavier this time. I became aware of my breathing. Too loud, too fast. Aaron shifted beside me. "I don't like that." "Yeah," I said. Neither of us moved. We just stood there, watching it. Then slowly it started to move again. Not away, not sideways, up, straight up toward the surface. I felt myself lean back without thinking. The glow rose until it was just beneath the surface of the water. Then it stopped. For a second, nothing happened. Then it faded. Gone. The water stayed still. No disturbance, no sign anything had been there. Aaron let out a breath. "Nope, I'm done." He turned and started walking back up the path. I followed him without arguing. We didn't speak for a while, just walked. When we reached the car park, I glanced back at the tarn. The fog had settled again. Everything looked normal. Flat water. Still air. But just before I got into the car, I noticed something at the shoreline. A thin line, running along the edge of the water, where the glow had stopped. The stones there looked different, slightly darker, like they'd been wet longer than the rest, except the rest were already dry. I was lying on my back, just trying to fall asleep, when I noticed this faint glow behind my eyelids. It wasn't bright, just a soft pulsing, like when someone walks past your window with a flashlight, except slower. Rhythmic. At first I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks, so I kept them shut. The glow kept coming and going, steady, like it had a pattern. That's when I noticed the ringing in my ears. High-pitched, not loud, but constant, like the sound you get after a loud concert, except I'd been home all night. I opened my eyes. My room was completely dark, like darker than it should have been. Usually there's some light from the street lamp outside that comes through the curtains, but there was nothing. I couldn't even make out the shape of my dresser across the room. The ringing didn't stop. I just laid there, staring into the dark, waiting for my eyes to adjust. They didn't. It stayed pitch black, the kind of dark where you start to feel like your eyes are open but not working. I reached over to grab my phone from the nightstand. I remember exactly where I'd left it, but when I moved my hand, it felt off, like the distance was wrong. I knocked into something and froze. It wasn't my phone. It felt like smooth, cold, and it wasn't supposed to be there. I pulled my hand back immediately and just sat there, not moving. The ringing in my ears got slightly louder, or maybe I just focused on it more. I couldn't tell. After a few seconds, I tried again, slower this time. I reached out carefully and found the edge of the nightstand. That part was normal. I slid my hand across it until I felt my phone. No metal thing anymore. I grabbed the phone and turned the screen on. The light felt way too bright. I squinted and looked around. Everything looked normal. Bed, dresser, door, all where they should be. No metal object, nothing out of place. The time on my phone said 2:17 a.m. I remember thinking I must have half-dreamed that part, like when you wake up in the middle of a dream and things overlap for a second. It made enough sense that I convinced myself to relax. But the ringing didn't stop. I checked my notifications, mostly just to distract myself. No messages, no missed calls. I turned on the flashlight and pointed it at the nightstand. Nothing there. Just my book, a glass of water, and some random receipts. I turned the flashlight off and set the phone back down. As soon as the screen went dark, the room dropped back into that same heavy blackness. Not normal dark. It felt thicker, like it had weight to it. That's when I noticed the glow again. Not behind my eyelids this time. Through the curtains. It was faint but definitely there, a soft light leaking around the edges, pulsing the same way it had before. Slow, steady. I pushed myself up my elbows and just watched it. The ringing in my ears matched the rhythm of the light, or at least it felt like it did. I told myself it was probably a car outside, maybe someone idling with weird headlights or something, but it didn't move. The light didn't shift or flicker like headlights would. It just pulsed. I got out of bed and walked over to the window. The floor felt colder than usual, which I noticed right away. Not freezing, just colder than it should have been. I stood there for a second, hand on the curtain, hesitating. I don't know why. It's just a window, but something about the way that light was coming through made me pause. The ringing got louder, not painfully loud, just more present, like it was pushing everything else out. I pulled the curtain back. The street outside was empty. No cars, no people. The street lamp was off, which I'd never seen before. It's always on. The light wasn't coming from the street. It was coming from above. I tilted my head up slightly, trying to see where it was coming from, but I couldn't find a clear source. The sky looked wrong. Not cloudy, not clear, just dim. Like there was something between me and it, but I couldn't make out what. The pulsing got stronger. I stepped back from the window without really thinking about it. My chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath without realizing. That's when something tapped the glass. Not loud, just a soft, single tap. I froze. It came from the outside. I didn't want to look, but I did. Slowly. There was nothing there. Just my reflection, faint in the glass. The street behind me, empty. I stared for a few seconds, waiting for something to move. Another tap, same spot, same soft sound. I leaned closer to the window, trying to see better. My reflection shifted with me, and for a second I thought that's all it was. Then I realized something. My reflection wasn't moving exactly right. It was close, but slightly off. Like there was a delay or it was lagging behind me by just a fraction of a second. I pulled back quickly. The reflection didn't. It stayed there, leaning toward the glass. My stomach dropped. I blinked hard, and then it snapped back into place, matching me again like normal. The ringing spiked, sharp enough that I winced. I stumbled back from the window and nearly tripped over the edge of my bed. I didn't take my eyes off it. The light outside kept pulsing. I grabbed my phone again, hands shaking a bit now, and turned on the camera instead of the flashlight. I pointed it at the window. Through the screen, everything looked normal. No weird lighting, no distortion, just a dark street and my own reflection. I lowered the phone slowly. The second I took my eyes off the screen, the glow came back, stronger now, filling the edges of the room. The ringing was constant, pressing in. I don't remember deciding to leave the room, but suddenly I was at my door, opening it. The hallway light was on, which didn't make sense because I always turn it off before bed. I stepped out. The ringing dropped instantly, just gone. The silence felt almost as heavy as the sound had been. I stood there for a minute, listening, trying to hear anything from my room. Nothing. No pulsing light, no tapping, nothing. Everything felt normal again. I walked back in slowly. The room looked completely normal. Same dim light from the street lamp, like it had never gone off. No glow, no strange darkness. I checked the window. Nothing outside. I checked my phone. 3:02 a.m. I stared at that for a long time. I know it had been 2:17 when I first checked. I remember it clearly. There's no way I stood there for that long without noticing. I didn't go back to sleep. I stayed in the hallway until morning, just sitting against the wall with my phone in my hand. When the sun came up, everything looked fine. Everything looked fine, normal, like nothing had happened. But later that day, when I picked up my phone to charge it, I noticed something. There was a photo in my camera roll I didn't remember taking. It was just my bedroom window, taken from outside. I was walking back from Darren's place a little after midnight when I saw it. It was quiet in that way suburban streets get late at night, where everything feels paused. No cars, no voices, just the low hum of something distant you can't place. It had rained earlier, so the pavement still looked dark and wet under the streetlights. I was halfway down Oak Ridge Close when I noticed a small white light hovering just above a parked car. At first I thought it was just a reflection, like maybe a porch light catching on the roof or something, but it didn't match anything around it. It sat about a foot above the car, dead still. No flicker, no movement, just there. I slowed down without really meaning to. The car was a silver Vauxhall Astra, parked on the left side of the street. I'd seen it before. I think it belonged to a woman named Carla, who lived a few houses down. Nothing unusual about it, except that light. It wasn't bright enough to light anything up. It didn't cast shadows. It just existed, like a small, solid dot. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, just staring at it, trying to figure out what I was actually looking at. Then it faded out, not like it switched off. It just dimmed, slowly, evenly, until it was gone. I remember blinking a couple times, like I'd missed something, but there was nothing there anymore, just the car. I told myself it was probably something simple. Reflection, glare, something in my eyes. I'd had a couple beers at Darren's, not enough to be drunk, but enough that I figured maybe my vision was just off for a second. So I kept walking. As I got closer to the car, I glanced at the spot where the light had been. Nothing, just the smooth curve of the roof, still damp from the rain. But when I passed it, I noticed something else. The car's windows were completely fogged up. Not just slightly, fully clouded over, like someone had been sitting inside with the engine running and the heat on. But the car was off. No lights, no sound, nothing. I slowed again, just a bit. I leaned slightly toward the passenger side window as I walked past, trying to see if anyone was inside. I couldn't make out anything through the fog. For a second, I thought I saw movement. Not clearly. Just a vague shift behind the glass, like something changing position. I stopped. The street felt quieter all of a sudden, like even the distant hum had dropped away. I stood there next to the car, staring at the window. Nothing moved. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just the fog playing tricks, maybe my own reflection. I stepped closer. "Hello?" I said, not loud, just enough to carry. No response. I raised my hand and wiped a small patch of the fog away with my sleeve. The glass was ice cold, way colder than it should have been. The spot I cleared stayed clear for a second, and I leaned in to look. The seat was empty. No one inside. I stood there for a second longer, just looking at it, then stepped back. My chest felt tight, like I just realized something was off but couldn't explain why. I started walking again, a bit faster now. I'd only gone a few steps when I heard a soft sound behind me. A faint click, like a car door unlocking. I stopped. I didn't turn around right away. I just stood there, listening. Nothing. I told myself it was probably another car nearby. Maybe someone unlocking theirs from inside their house. Still, I turned around. The Astra was exactly how I'd left it. No lights, no movement. But the fog on the windows was gone. All of it. The glass was completely clear now, like it had never been fogged at all. I felt that same tightness in my chest again, stronger this time. I stared at the car for a few seconds, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. So I turned and kept walking. My house was only a couple minutes away, but the whole street felt different now, like I was being watched, even though I knew that sounds stupid. I kept checking the windows of the houses as I passed them, expecting to see someone looking out. No one was. I got to my front door, unlocked it, and went inside. Locked it again right away, without thinking. Everything inside was normal. Kitchen light still on, TV off, same as I'd left it. I told myself to just forget it. Weird moment, nothing more. I went upstairs, got changed, and got into bed. But I couldn't settle. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing that light hovering over the car, the way it faded out, the way the windows had fogged up. After maybe 20 minutes, I sat up and checked the time. 1:08 a.m. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling. That's when I noticed a faint glow coming through the curtains. My stomach dropped a little. It wasn't bright, just enough to notice. A soft white light, steady. I sat up again, slower this time. My room faced the street, same side the Astra had been on. I didn't want to look, but I got out of bed and walked over to the window anyway. I pulled the curtain back just a little. The car was still there, and the light was back. Same position, hovering just above the roof, completely still. I just stood there, holding the curtain, watching it. It didn't pulse this time. It didn't flicker. It just sat there. After a few seconds, I noticed something else. The car wasn't parked exactly where it had been before. It was only a small difference, maybe a foot or two forward. But I was sure it hadn't been that close to the driveway earlier. I stared at it, trying to convince myself I was remembering wrong. Then the light faded again. Same as before. Slow, even, until it was gone. The street went back to normal. I kept watching for a while, waiting for something else. Nothing happened. Eventually, I let the curtain fall back into place and went back to bed. I didn't sleep much. In the morning, I went outside to check. The Astra was still there. I walked past it like I had the night before, trying to act normal even though no one was around. The windows were clear, no fog, no sign anyone had been inside. But when I got closer, I noticed something on the roof. A small, perfectly round patch where the water hadn't settled. Like the rest of the car was still damp from the rain, but that one spot was completely dry, about the size of a coin, right where the light had been hovering. I woke up because my phone was warm in my hand. I don't fall asleep holding it. I always leave it on the nightstand. But when I came to, it was pressed against my palm like I'd been gripping it. The screen was on, not bright, just dim, like it had been on for a while. I blinked a few times trying to focus, and that's when I noticed it was recording. Voice memo app. Red bar moving across the top. Timer counting up. I stared at that number for a second, trying to make sense of it. 2 hours, 13 minutes. I definitely hadn't started recording anything. I hit stop. The timer froze. For a moment, I just sat there in bed, looking at the screen, waiting for something else to happen. My room was still dark. Faint early morning light just starting to come through the curtains. It had that quiet, heavy feeling right before sunrise. I checked the time. 5:26 a.m. I tried to remember when I'd gone to sleep. Around midnight, maybe a little after. I didn't remember waking up at any point. I looked back at the recording. There was only one file. Saved automatically. No name, just the timestamp. I hesitated before playing it. I don't know why. It's just a recording. But something about waking up to it already running felt wrong. Still, I tapped it. For the first few seconds, there was nothing. Just that faint background noise you get from a phone mic. Then the hum started. Low, steady. Not loud, but constant. Like a distant engine, except smoother. No vibration to it, just a flat tone that didn't change. I turned the volume up slightly. The hum stayed exactly the same, no variation, no pattern. I listened for a minute, maybe longer, nothing else. Then, right near the end, there was a sound. A single metallic tap. Sharp. Quick. Like something small hitting a hard surface, and then it went back to just the hum. The recording ended a few seconds later. I sat there for a while, replaying that part over and over. The tap didn't sound like anything in my room. Not my phone, not the bed frame, not anything I recognized. I looked around. Everything was normal. Door closed, window shut, nothing out of place. I checked my call history, thinking maybe I'd accidentally called someone or something had triggered the recording. Nothing. No missed calls. No outgoing. I got out of bed and checked the rest of the house. I live alone. Small place just outside Keswick, kind of on the edge of a wooded area. It's quiet out there, especially early in the morning. Kitchen was empty, back door still locked, nothing disturbed. I stood there for a minute listening. No hum, just the normal quiet. I went back upstairs, picked up my phone again, and played the recording one more time. Same thing. Low hum. Then the tap. That was it. I noticed something else then. There was a gap at the start of the recording. The timer said over 2 hours, but the actual audio only lasted about 30 minutes. The rest was just blank. No sound at all. I scrubbed through it, moving the timeline back and forth. For the first hour and 40 minutes, there was nothing. Completely silent. Then, suddenly, the hum started. No build-up, no fade-in, just there. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to think. Maybe I'd turned it on in my sleep. That happens, right? People do stuff like that. but why would it be silent for that long? And what was the hum? I got dressed and went downstairs again, made some coffee, tried to distract myself, but I kept thinking about it. After a while, I decided to check outside. It was fully morning by then, gray sky, low clouds hanging over the hills. The ground was damp from overnight mist, but not full rain. I stepped out into the garden. Everything looked normal. Fence, shed, the line of trees at the back, nothing unusual. I walked toward the shed, mostly just to give myself something to do. Halfway there, I noticed something on the ground, a small dent in the grass. Not deep, just a slight depression like something had pressed down for a moment. It was round, about the size of a dinner plate. I stood over it, looking down. The grass inside the circle looked flattened but not broken, just pushed down evenly. I glanced around, checking for anything else like it. There were two more, all in a rough line, spaced a few feet apart, leading toward the back fence. I followed them slowly, each one the same size, same shape, same shallow depression. They stopped right at the fence. I looked up. The trees beyond were still, no wind, no movement. I stood there for a minute, just listening. And then, for a second, I thought I heard it again. The hum. Faint, barely there. I held my breath, trying to catch it. It faded almost immediately. I went back inside. The rest of the day felt off. Not in a dramatic way, just small things. My phone battery drained faster than usual. The kitchen clock was a couple minutes ahead of my phone, even though I'd synced them recently. Stuff like that. Nothing I could point to and say, yeah, something's definitely wrong. That night, I made sure to leave my phone on the desk, not the nightstand. I closed the door fully. Checked the windows twice. I went to bed around the same time as usual. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up. Same way. Phone in my hand, screen dimly lit, recording. This time the timer read 47:12. I stopped it immediately. My chest felt tight again, same as the morning before. I didn't play it right away. I sat there for a while, just holding the phone, staring at the screen. Eventually, I tapped it. The hum started almost immediately this time. Same tone, same steady flat sound, no variation. I skipped ahead. There was no silence at the beginning, just the hum, continuous. And then, near the end, the tap again. But this time it was closer, louder, like it had happened right next to the phone. I replayed it twice, maybe 3 times. Each time, it sounded the same. Hum, tap, end. I looked at my hand. I was holding the phone the same way as before, tight, like I'd been gripping it in my sleep. I didn't go back to bed after that. I stayed up until morning, sitting in the kitchen with the lights on. When it got light outside, I went back into the garden. The dents were still there, but there was a new one. Closer to the house, just a few feet from the back door. Same size, same shape, perfectly round. I was halfway through a backroad stretch outside Ely when I first saw it. It was late, just after 11, and the roads were empty. That part of Cambridgeshire is just flat farmland for miles, with long straight roads cutting through it. No streetlights, just the occasional farmhouse set way back from the road. I was driving home from my sister Leanne's place. Nothing unusual about the night. Clear sky, no fog, just cold. The headlights were the only real light out there. I noticed the glow off to the left in one of the fields. At first, I thought it was someone out there with a torch. It was low to the ground, maybe a few feet up, dim and steady, but it didn't cast light onto anything. The grass around it stayed completely dark. That's what made me look twice. Usually, even a weak light will spill onto something nearby. This one didn't. It just sat there like a dull spot in the air. I slowed down slightly, not enough to stop some trussless cap, just enough to get a better look as I passed. The glow didn't move. It didn't flicker, just stayed there, fixed in place. Then, as I drove alongside it, it started to rise, straight up. No arc, no wobble, just a clean vertical movement like it was being pulled upward. I turned my head to keep it in view. It didn't get brighter or dimmer. It just kept that same faint glow as it went higher. After a few seconds, it faded out. Not far up either. Maybe as high as a 2-story house, and then it was gone. I checked my mirrors, half expecting to see it behind me again. Nothing. The field was just dark. I kept driving. For a while, I told myself it was something simple. Someone out in the field, maybe checking something. The way it rose didn't make sense, but I tried not to think about that part. A few minutes passed. The road stretched straight ahead, same empty fields on both sides. Then I saw another one, this time on the right. Same thing. Dim glow, low to the ground, not lighting anything around it. I slowed more this time. My eyes stayed fixed on it as I approached. It didn't react. No movement, no change. I rolled down my window slightly, just to listen. Nothing, no sound at all. No hum, no wind, nothing coming from that direction. As I got closer, I could see the shape a bit better. It wasn't a point of light. It had a slight spread to it, like a soft blur, but still contained. Like it had edges, but you couldn't quite see them. I slowed almost to a crawl. The car behind me, there wasn't one. The road was completely empty. I watched the glow. It stayed still until I was nearly parallel with it. Then it rose, same as before, straight up smooth, no acceleration or slowdown. I leaned slightly toward the passenger side window, trying to keep it in sight. It reached about the same height as the first one. Then it faded. Gone. I sat there for a second, foot hovering between brake and accelerator. My chest felt tight again. I didn't want to stop completely, but I didn't want to speed up either, so I just rolled forward slowly. That's when I noticed something else. The fields were too dark. I know that sounds obvious, but it was different. Even at night, your headlights spill out a bit into the fields. You see texture, shapes, the edge of the land. Now it looked flat, like the light wasn't reaching properly. I glanced at my headlights. They were on full beam. I flicked them off and on again. No change. The road ahead looked fine, but the sides where the fields were felt like they were just not there. I gripped the wheel tighter. Another glow appeared ahead. This one was further out in the field, maybe 20 or 30 meters from the road. It stayed low, same as the others. I slowed again. As I approached, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were two more behind it, all in a line, equally spaced. All the same, dim, steady glow, none of them lighting anything around them. I felt this strong urge to just keep driving and ignore it, but I couldn't stop looking. The first one started to rise, then the second, then the third. All at the same time, perfectly in sync, straight up. I slowed to a near stop. My car crept forward, barely moving. The lights kept rising, same speed, same height. Then one by one, they faded out. Front to back, gone. The field went completely dark again. I sat there for a second, engine idling, headlights cutting into nothing. Then I noticed the silence. The engine was still running, but it sounded distant, muted, like I was hearing it from inside something. I looked down at the dashboard. Everything looked normal. Speedometer, fuel, all fine. But the sound didn't match. I pressed the accelerator slightly. The engine revved, but it still sounded far away. That's when I saw something in front of the car. Not in the field, on the road. A shape. Low, close to the ground. Darker than the road itself. It wasn't solid. More like a shadow, but thicker. I froze. The car rolled forward a few inches. The shape didn't move. It just sat there, right in the beam of the headlights. But the light didn't hit it properly. It was like the headlights stopped at its edges. I didn't want to get closer. I pressed the brake. The car stopped. I sat there, staring at it. The silence pressed in harder. Then slowly the shape lifted, just like the lights had, straight up. No sound, no change. As it rose, it thinned out, like it was stretching. Then it faded. Gone. The sound of the engine snapped back to normal. Loud, immediate. The fields looked normal again. My headlights lit up the grass like they should. I didn't wait. I pressed the accelerator and drove. I didn't look at the fields again. Just kept my eyes on the road. After a few minutes, I reached a more populated area. A few houses, some streetlights. Everything felt normal again. I pulled over at the first lay-by I saw. Sat there for a minute, hands still on the wheel. I checked the time. 12:38 a.m. That didn't make sense. The drive from Leanne's should have taken about 25 minutes. I'd left just after 11. Even with slowing down, there was no way it should have taken that long. I tried to think back, to piece together the timeline. When I'd first seen the light. How long I'd been on that road. It didn't line up. I sat there for a bit longer, then drove the rest of the way home. When I got out of the car, I noticed something on the front bumper. 3 faint marks. Vertical. Close together. Like something had passed upward, right in front of it. I was lying on the roof of my friend Callum's van when I noticed the star move. We'd parked up on this gravel pull-off above a valley near Glencoe. No buildings nearby, no real light pollution. Just hills, a thin road below, and a clear sky full of stars. It was cold, but not freezing. Dry air, no wind. One of those nights where everything feels still. Callum had gone inside the van to grab a blanket or something. I stayed up on the roof, hands behind my head, just staring up. I wasn't really thinking about anything, just watching. That's when I noticed one of the stars drifting. At first, I assumed it was a plane. There's a few flight paths over that area, and you see them all the time at night. But planes blink. Red, white, steady patterns. This didn't blink. It just moved. Slowly, in a straight line, like it was sliding across the sky. I tracked it with my eyes for a bit, waiting for a flash or something to confirm it was a plane. Nothing. Callum, I said. Not loud, just enough to carry. You seeing this? No answer. I kept watching it. The movement was too smooth, no sound either. Usually you can hear planes out there, even if they're high up. A faint rumble, something. This was silent. It kept drifting, steady pace, no change in direction. Then it stopped. Stopped. Mid-sky. I sat up slightly, propping myself on my elbows. Callum, I said again, louder this time. Come here a sec. He opened the van door below me. What? That, I said, pointing. He climbed up beside me, following my finger. What am I looking at? That one. It was moving. He squinted. Looks like a star. It was moving, I said again. Like a plane, but no lights. We both watched it. It didn't move again, just sat there, exactly where it had stopped. Maybe it's just perspective or something, he said. Like it looked like it was moving. I didn't answer, because I knew what I'd seen. We lay there for a minute, both staring at it. Then it started to fade. Not quickly, not like it switched off. It just dimmed, slowly, evenly, until it was gone. Callum let out a small laugh. All right, that's weird. Yeah, I said. We kept watching the sky like something else might happen. Nothing did. After a while, he went back down into the van. I stayed up there. I couldn't stop looking at the spot where it had been. I started picking out other stars just to compare. None of them moved. Everything looked normal again. But I kept getting this feeling that I'd missed something. Like the movement had been part of something bigger and I'd only caught a piece of it. I don't know how long I stayed up there. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe longer. At some point, I noticed another one. Different part of the sky this time. Same thing. At first, it looked like a normal star. Then it started drifting, slower than the first one. I sat up again, more alert this time. Callum, I called. No response. I leaned over the edge of the van and looked down. The van door was closed, no light inside. I knocked on the roof lightly. You awake? Nothing. Nothing. I frowned and looked back up. The star was still moving, same smooth motion, no blinking, no sound. I watched it closely, trying to track its path. It wasn't straight this time. It curved slightly, just enough to notice. Then it stopped again. Same as before. Dead still. I didn't even bother calling Callum again. I just watched and waited. A few seconds passed, then it faded. Same slow dimming. Gone. I lay back down, but I didn't relax this time. My eyes kept scanning the sky, moving from one point to another, looking for anything else out of place. That's when I realized something. The sky felt off. Not visibly, exactly. All the stars were there in the same patterns, but something about the spacing felt wrong, like they were slightly closer together or further apart. I couldn't tell. It made it hard to focus on any one point. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe my eyes were just strained. Then I noticed the silence. It had gotten deeper. Before there'd been faint sounds. Wind brushing over the hills, maybe a distant car on the road. Now there was nothing. Not even the usual background hum you don't notice until it's gone. I sat up again, more slowly this time. Callum, I said, quieter now. Still no response. I swung my legs over the side of the van and dropped down. The gravel crunched under my boots, loud in the silence. I walked to the van door and pulled it open. Callum was inside, lying on the bench seat, but something looked off. It took me a second to figure out what. He was completely still, not like sleeping, just still. I stepped closer. Callum? No movement. I leaned in and nudged his shoulder. He shifted slightly like he was waking up. What? He mumbled. You asleep? Yeah, he said, eyes barely open. Why? You didn't hear me? Hear what? I hesitated. Nothing, I said. Just thought you were awake. He rolled over, pulling the blanket tighter. You coming in or what? In a minute, I said. I stepped back out and looked up again. The sky looked normal, stars in place, no movement. The silence felt less heavy now. I could hear the faint wind again. I stood there for a bit, trying to shake the feeling. Then I climbed back onto the roof. I lay down, staring up. Everything stayed still. No drifting lights, no fading stars. After a while, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember, it was morning. Gray sky, low clouds rolling over the hills. Callum was already outside making coffee on the little stove. "You were out cold," he said when he saw me. "Didn't move all night." "Yeah," I said, climbing down. I checked my phone, 9:12 a.m. That didn't seem right. I didn't remember falling asleep that early. I tried to think back to place when I'd come down from the roof. I couldn't. It just skipped. I looked up at the sky again. Nothing there but clouds. Later, when we were packing up, I mentioned the stars moving. Callum shrugged. "You were probably just tired. Messes with your eyes." "Yeah," I said. But when we got back into the van, I noticed something on the roof. 3 faint marks. Not scratches, not dents, just slightly lighter patches like the dust had been disturbed. They were spaced out in a line, about the same distance apart. I stood there looking at them for a while, trying to match the spacing in my head to the way those lights had stopped in the sky. I only noticed it because my dog wouldn't settle. It was around 3 a.m., maybe a bit after. I live in a small detached house on the edge of a village near Shrewsbury. Not much around except fields and a couple of other houses spaced out along the lane. My dog, Marley, usually sleeps through the night without moving. But that night he kept shifting, getting up, walking to the back door, then coming back. I checked the time on my phone, 3:12. "All right, what is it?" I said, sitting up. He didn't bark, just stood there, ears forward, staring toward the kitchen. I got up, pulled on a hoodie, and followed him downstairs. The house was quiet. No sounds from outside, no wind, nothing. The kind of silence that makes small noises stand out more than they should. Marley went straight to the back door and stood there, stiff. I flicked the light on. Nothing unusual. Garden looked the same as always. Fence, shed, patch of grass, the line of trees at the back. I waited a minute, watching. Marley didn't relax. Eventually, I let him out. He stepped outside slowly, not like he usually does. Normally, he bolts out, runs straight to the far corner. This time he stayed close to the door, sniffing the air more than the ground. I stood there, holding the door open, watching him. After a few seconds, he looked up. Not at me, past me, like he was tracking something above the house. I turned slightly, following his line of sight, but there was nothing there, just darkness. "Come on," I said, trying to sound normal. He didn't move. I stepped outside onto the patio. The air felt colder than it should have been. Not freezing, just sharp. I looked around again. Nothing. No lights, no movement, no sound. Marley suddenly backed up and pressed against my leg. That's when I heard it, a faint sound, almost like static, not coming from any direction in particular, just there. I held my breath, trying to isolate it. It stayed constant. Then it stopped. Just cut out. Marley turned and went straight back inside. I followed, shutting the door behind me. He went upstairs immediately and curled up on the bed like he wanted to be as far from the ground floor as possible. I stayed up for a bit, sitting on the edge of the bed, listening. Everything was quiet again. Eventually, I lay back down. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I remember was my alarm going off at 7. Everything felt normal. Marley was fine, acting like nothing had happened. I went through the usual routine, coffee, shower, getting ready for work. It wasn't until I got a notification on my phone that I thought about it again. Motion detected, backyard camera. Time, 03:18 a.m. I frowned. That would have been right after I went back to bed. I opened the app. The clip was already there, saved automatically. I hesitated for a second, then played it. The camera angle showed the whole garden, same as I'd seen it earlier. For the first few seconds, nothing happened, just an empty garden. Then, without warning, the entire image washed out. Bright white, not like a light turning on. It was instant. One frame normal, next frame completely overexposed. I leaned closer to the screen. There was no detail at all, just white. It lasted for a few seconds, then it snapped back to normal. Same garden, same angle, nothing out of place. I replayed it. Same thing, normal. Flash, normal. I noticed the timestamp in the corner. It read 3:18:22 at the last normal frame before the flash. Then, when the image came back, it read through 29. 7 seconds missing. I scrubbed through the clip, frame by frame. There were no frames showing anything in between, just a jump. I sat there for a while, watching it over and over, trying to see if there was any shape in the white, any shadow, anything. Like there wasn't, just blank. I checked the rest of the recordings from that night. Nothing else triggered. No movement before, no movement after, just that one clip. I zoomed in on different parts of the frame. Fence, shed, grass. Everything looked normal once the image came back. No scorch marks, no damage, nothing. I went outside to check anyway. The garden looked the same as always, but when I walked toward the center of the lawn, I noticed something. The grass felt off, not wet, not dry, just slightly flattened in a circular patch. It wasn't obvious unless you were standing right on it. I looked around for anything else. There were 2 more patches, all roughly the same size, spread out across the garden. I stood there for a minute, trying to match their positions to the camera angle in my head. They lined up roughly with where the brightest part of the flash had been. I went back inside and watched the clip again. This time, I paid attention to the edges. Just before the flash, there was a faint flicker along the top of the frame. Barely noticeable, like something passing just out of view. I paused it, zoomed in. It didn't look like anything clear, just a distortion. I leaned back, staring at the screen. Marley came into the room and sat next to me. He didn't look at the screen. He looked toward the back door. I checked the time on the recording again, and 3:18. That would have been a few minutes after I went upstairs. I tried to remember if I'd heard anything else. Any sound, any light through the curtains. Nothing, just that faint static earlier. I left the app open and went about my day. But later that evening, when it got dark again, I checked the camera feed. Everything looked normal. Same view, same lighting. I watched it for a few minutes. Nothing happened. Then, for a split second, the image dimmed. Not a full flash this time, just a slight drop in brightness. And in that moment, I thought I saw something at the top edge of the frame. Not a shape exactly, more like a darker area against the sky. It was gone almost immediately. The image returned to normal. I stared at the screen for a long time after that. Marley stayed close to me the rest of the night. He didn't go near the back door again. I first noticed it while I was brushing my teeth. It wasn't loud, just a low hum, almost like a distant appliance running somewhere in the house. But it didn't sound right. It felt wrong. It wasn't just in my ears. It felt like pressure, like when you're driving up a hill and your ears don't quite adjust. I paused, toothbrush still in my mouth, and listened. The sound didn't change. It didn't get louder or quieter when I tilted my head. It didn't seem to come from any direction. It just existed. I spat, rinsed, and stepped out of the bathroom into the hallway. Still there. I stood for a second, waiting to see if it would stop. It didn't. Boiler, I muttered to myself. The house was old. Stuff made noise sometimes. I walked downstairs, each step slow, listening. The hum stayed exactly the same. No change in pitch, no fluctuation. The kitchen was dark. I hadn't turned any lights on yet. I flicked the switch. Nothing unusual. Fridge was off. Well, not off, but silent like it usually is between cycles. No washing machine running, no extractor fan. I opened the back door. The moment I stepped outside, the hum stopped. Not faded, not reduced, just gone. I froze on the patio, 1 foot still inside, 1 foot out. I leaned back slightly into the kitchen. The hum came back instantly. I stepped fully outside again. Silence. I stood there for a few seconds, heart beating a little faster now. Then I stepped back in. The hum returned. Same intensity, same pressure. I frowned and shut the door. The sound didn't change. It wasn't coming from outside. It was inside. Or something about being inside. I walked through the house slowly, moving from room to room. The hum followed. Or maybe it didn't follow. It was just everywhere. Living room, same. Hallway, same. Upstairs again, same. It didn't matter where I went. It didn't change. I checked my phone, thinking maybe it was something electronic interfering. A notification sound glitching, something like that. Nothing. No apps open, no audio playing. I even turned it off completely. The hum stayed. I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to think. It wasn't painful, just uncomfortable. Like a constant pressure pushing inward from both sides of my head. I pressed my fingers against my ears. It didn't muffle it. That's what got to me. Normally, any sound changes when you block your ears. This didn't. I stood up again. All right, I said quietly, like saying it would help. I went back downstairs and opened the front door this time. stepped outside. Silence again. Clean, normal silence. I stood on the pavement for a minute, looking around. It was early morning. Gray sky, light drizzle just starting. The street was empty. Everything felt normal. I stepped back inside. The hum returned immediately. I shut the door slowly, staring straight ahead. It stayed, didn't fade, didn't change. I grabbed my keys. I didn't want to stay inside. I stepped back out, locked the door behind me, and stood there. The hum was gone. Completely. I stayed outside longer than I needed to, just standing there, letting the quiet settle. Eventually, I went to my car and drove to work. No hum in the car, no pressure. Everything felt normal again. I almost convinced myself it had been something minor. Maybe my ears were blocked or something. But when I got home that evening, the moment I stepped inside, it was back, same as before. Instant. Full. I shut the door behind me and stood there in the hallway. The house looked exactly the same as I'd left it. Nothing out of place. But the sound, no, the pressure, was there again. I dropped my bag and walked straight to the back door, opened it, stepped outside. Silence. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Then I stepped back in. The hum returned. I stood there, half in, half out, testing it. In hum. Out. Nothing. I did it a few times, just to be sure. It was consistent. I closed the door again. The pressure settled back in. I went upstairs, trying to ignore it, changed clothes, sat on the bed. It didn't ease, didn't shift, just stayed constant. That's when I noticed something else. The air felt different. Not temperature, just density. Like the space inside the house was slightly thicker, hard to explain, but it made breathing feel a bit more noticeable. I stood up again, walked to the window, opened it. Leaning out slightly, the hum faded, not completely, but enough to notice. I pulled back inside. It returned to full strength. I closed the window, sat there for a second. Then I went downstairs again. I needed to figure out where it was strongest. I moved slowly through each room, stopping in different spots. Kitchen, living room, hallway. It was the same everywhere, except one place, near the back wall, close to where the garden started. The hum felt heavier there, more pressure. I stood still, focusing on it. My ears popped slightly, just once, then settled. I frowned and stepped closer to the wall. The pressure increased. Not painfully, just enough to make me uncomfortable. I placed my hand on the wall, cold, colder than rest of the house. I kept my hand there for a few seconds. The hum didn't change, but I felt something else, a faint vibration, not through my hand, through my arm, like it was traveling up from the contact point. I pulled my hand back. The vibration stopped. I stepped away from the wall. The pressure eased slightly. Not gone, just less intense. I stood there staring at it. The wall looked completely normal. No marks, no damage, just brick and plaster. I stepped back again. The hum returned to its usual level. I turned and walked straight to the front door. Opened it. Stepped outside. Silence. I stayed there longer this time. The drizzle had picked up a bit, light rain tapping against the pavement. Normal sounds. Comforting, almost. After a while, I went back in. The hum came back immediately. I didn't stay long, just grabbed a few things and left again. I spent most of the evening outside, walking around the block, sitting in my car, anything to avoid going back in. Eventually, I had to. It was getting late. I stepped inside, closed the door, and stood there. The hum settled in around me, same as before. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I just went upstairs and lay down. The pressure didn't stop. It stayed constant. I stared at the ceiling, listening to it, feeling it. At some point, I got up and went to the window again, opened it, leaned out. The hum faded. I looked out into the garden, dark, still. Then I noticed something, near the back wall, just above the fence line, a faint distortion, barely visible, like the air was bending slightly. I blinked. It stayed. I leaned further out. The hum dropped more. The distortion shifted. Not much, just a slight movement to the side. I pulled back inside. The hum returned. I stepped away from the window. The distortion was no longer visible from inside. I stood there for a long time, not moving, just listening to the pressure in my ears. Eventually, I closed the window and lay back down. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I went straight outside again. The silence felt normal, clean. I walked around to the back of the house, stood near the wall. Nothing. No distortion, no sound. Everything looked exactly how it should. But when I stepped back inside, the hum was still there. I was sitting by the fire when everything went quiet. not gradually, not like the usual drop in sound when the wind dies down or the insects settle. It just cut out. 1 second there were crickets, leaves shifting, the soft crackle of the fire. The next, nothing. It took me a second to even register it. My brain kept expecting the noise to come back, like it was a gap between sounds. But it didn't. I was camping alone in Kielder Forest, not too far from one of the marked trails, but far enough that I couldn't see any lights or hear any roads. I'd picked a small clearing I'd used once before, surrounded by tall pines. It was late, maybe just after midnight. The fire had burned down to embers, just enough to keep a faint glow going. I remember sitting there, holding a mug of tea, staring into the coals when the silence hit. I looked up slowly. The trees stood completely still. No wind. That wasn't unusual on its own, but there should have been something. Owls, insects, distant movement. There's always something in a forest at night. I set the mug down carefully. Even that felt too loud. I listened. Nothing. Not even the faint background hum you don't notice until it's gone. My ears started to ring slightly, like they were trying to fill the gap. I stood up, turning slowly in place. "Hello?" I said, just to hear something. My voice sounded wrong, flat, like it didn't carry properly. It didn't echo at all. It just stopped. I frowned and stepped away from the fire into the darker edge of the clearing. The ground felt normal under my boots. Pine needles, soft soil. I took a few more steps, looking between the trees. That's when I saw it. A faint shimmer. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting to the dark, like when you stare too long and things start to blur. But this was different. It was a vertical distortion, about the height of a person, maybe a bit taller. Not solid. More like heat haze, but there was no heat. It moved, slowly between the trees. I froze. It didn't make a sound, didn't disturb the branches or the ground. It just slid between them like it wasn't fully there. My chest tightened. I took a step back without thinking. The shimmer paused. Not abruptly, just stopped moving. I couldn't see any detail inside it. No shape, no outline. Just that distortion, like the air was bending. I held my breath. It stayed still for a few seconds. Then it moved again. Closer this time. Not directly toward me, slightly angled like it was circling. I took another step back, closer to the fire. The silence pressed in harder. It felt thick. I tried to listen for anything. My own breathing, the fire, anything to ground myself. But even the fire had gone quiet. No crackling, no popping. Just that faint glow. The shimmer passed behind a tree. For a second I lost sight of it. Then it appeared again on the other side. Same slow movement. I felt this urge to keep my eyes on it, like if I looked away it would be closer when I looked back. So I didn't blink, didn't move, just watched. It moved another few steps between the trees. Then it started to thin, not fading exactly. More like it was stretching out, losing its shape. The distortion became weaker, harder to see. Then it dissolved. Gone. I stood there, staring at the spot where it had been. The silence stayed. For a few seconds, nothing changed. Then, all at once, the sound came back. Crickets. Leaves. The fire crackling again. It hit all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. I staggered slightly, caught off guard by the noise. I looked around quickly. Everything looked normal. Trees, shadows, the faint orange glow of the embers. No shimmer. No distortion. I stepped back toward the fire and crouched down. The heat felt normal again. I held my hands out, watching them in the light, just to confirm everything was real. I sat there for a while, trying to calm down, telling myself it was just my eyes, or maybe I'd zoned out for a second, but that didn't explain the silence, or the way it moved. I stayed up for another hour, feeding the fire a bit, not wanting it to go out. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I crawled into my tent. I didn't sleep properly. Every small noise made me sit up, listening. At some point, I must have dozed off. When I woke up, it was early morning, gray light filtering through the trees. Everything looked normal. I stepped out of the tent and stretched, trying to shake the feeling from the night before. The clearing looked the same, fire pit, gear, everything where I'd left it. But when I walked toward the edge of the trees, I noticed something. The ground was disturbed. Not in a clear way, just slightly off. A narrow path through the pine needles where they'd been pressed down. It wasn't like footprints. There was no clear pattern, just a line where the surface looked smoother, like something had passed over it without fully touching it. It started at the far edge of the clearing and curved slightly, right past where I'd been standing. Then it disappeared back into the trees. I followed it a few steps, crouching down to get a better look. The needles weren't broken, just flattened. I stood up slowly, looking along the line as far as I could. It faded after a few meters, blended back into the forest floor. I straightened up and stepped back. The forest sounded normal again. Birds now, too. Morning noise. I packed up quicker than I'd planned, didn't bother staying for breakfast. As I was leaving, I glanced back at the clearing one last time. Everything looked exactly how it should, except for that faint line through the ground, cutting right through the middle of it. I slowed down because I couldn't see the road anymore. The fog had come in fast, thicker than anything I'd driven through before. 1 minute it was just a light haze over the fields. The next, it was like someone had pulled a sheet over everything. I was on a narrow B road outside Whitby, heading back after visiting my cousin Ellie. It was just after 10 p.m., no streetlights, just my headlights cutting into the fog. Except they weren't cutting very far. The beam stopped a few meters ahead, swallowed by it. Everything beyond that was just gray. I dropped my speed to about 20. All right, I muttered, gripping the wheel a bit tighter. There were no other cars, no taillights ahead, no headlights behind, just me and that wall of fog. Then I saw the lights. At first I thought it was a car coming toward me. 2 headlights, side by side, but they were too high. They weren't at road level. They were floating. I frowned, leaning forward slightly. The lights hovered maybe 10 feet off the ground, just ahead of me, partially obscured by the fog. They didn't move. No approach, no drift, just stayed there. I eased my foot off the accelerator. Okay, I said quietly. Maybe it was a truck? Something on higher ground? But there wasn't any higher ground there, just flat fields on both sides. I slowed even more. The lights didn't change. No flicker, no shift. Just steady, white beams pointed directly at me. I expected them to dazzle me like oncoming headlights do. They didn't. They looked bright, but they didn't actually light anything up. Not the road, not the fog around them, just 2 points of light hanging there. I tapped my horn lightly. Nothing. No reaction. The lights stayed exactly where they were. I glanced at the edges of the road, trying to figure out if I was drifting out of my lane. The white line was barely visible, but still there. I was centered. I looked back at the lights, still there, same height, same distance. It didn't make sense. If it was another vehicle, it should have been moving. Even slowly, there'd be some change. There wasn't. I slowed almost to a stop. The engine idled quietly, the fog pressed in around me. The lights remained. For a second, I had this thought that they weren't headlights at all, just something shaped like them. I shook my head slightly. "Don't start that," I said under my breath. I turned my headlights off for a second. The road in front of me disappeared completely, but the floating lights stayed, unchanged. I turned my headlights back on quickly. My chest tightened. They weren't reacting to my lights. They weren't reflecting. They were just there. I sat there, car barely moving, trying to decide what to do. Drive forward? Turn around? I didn't like either option. Then, slowly, the lights shifted. Not forward, not sideways, down. They lowered slightly, maybe a foot or two. Then stopped again. I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't moved. They had. I pressed the brake fully. The car stopped. I stared at them. They stayed still for a few seconds. Then they rose again, back to their original height, smooth, no sound. I swallowed hard. "All right," I said quietly. "No." I shifted into reverse. I wasn't going to drive toward that. I eased back slowly, keeping my eyes on the lights. They didn't follow. They stayed where they were. Same distance. Same position. But as I reversed, something felt off. The distance between us didn't seem to change properly, like I was moving, but they weren't getting further away the way they should. I stopped again, put the car back in neutral. The lights remained, exactly where they had been. I took a breath. Then, without thinking too much about it, I turned the wheel slightly and edged forward again. Just a little. The lights didn't move. I went a bit further. Still nothing. The fog shifted slightly, thinning for just a moment, and in that gap, there was nothing there. No vehicle, no structure, no raised ground, just empty road. The lights were still visible, but there was nothing behind them, nothing supporting them. The fog thickened again almost immediately, swallowing everything back up. I stopped. My hands were tight on the wheel now. The lights stayed in place for a few more seconds. Then, one by one, they dimmed. Left first, Then right. Gone. The road ahead was just fog again. Empty. I didn't move for a few seconds. Just sat there, staring into it. Then I exhaled and pressed the accelerator. I drove straight through the spot where they'd been. There was nothing there. No obstruction, no sign of anything. Just the road. The fog started to thin after another minute or two. Gradually, I could see further ahead. The white lines became clearer. The edges of the fields came back into view. Everything looked normal again. I checked my mirrors. Nothing behind me. No lights. No sign of anything. I kept driving. Didn't stop until I reached the outskirts of town where there were actual streetlights. When I finally parked outside my house, I just sat there for a minute, engine off, trying to go over it in my head. Make it make sense. Eventually, I got out. As I walked past the front of the car, something caught my eye. I leaned down slightly, looking at the bonnet. There were two faint marks, perfectly round side by side, about the same distance apart as those lights had been. I woke up already sitting halfway upright. I don't remember opening my eyes first. I just remember that feeling hitting me all at once, like I wasn't alone. My heart was already racing before I fully understood why. The room was dark, but not completely. There was that faint early morning light coming through the curtains, just enough to make out shapes. Everything looked normal. Wardrobe, chair, door. But I couldn't shake it. That feeling that someone had just been there. Not hiding, not watching, just present. I stayed still, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, no movement, just the usual quiet of the house. I reached over slowly and grabbed my phone from the nightstand. 4:41 a.m. Too early for anything normal. I sat there, staring into the dim room, trying to convince myself it was just one of those things. A dream bleeding into waking up. But something felt off. The air. It was warmer on one side of the room. I turned my head toward the window. The curtains were closed, but not fully. There was a small gap where they didn't quite meet in the middle. That's where it felt different. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. The floor felt normal under my feet, cold, like it always did. I took a few slow steps toward the window. The warmth got more noticeable the closer I got. Not hot, just slightly above the rest of the room, like standing near something that had recently been giving off heat. I stopped a couple of feet away. The curtains were still. No breeze. The window was shut. I always keep it closed at night. I reached out and touched the fabric. Cool. I slid my hand along the edge and pulled it open slightly. The glass was clear. No condensation, no marks. Outside, the street was empty. Same quiet houses, parked cars, nothing moving. I pressed my palm lightly against the glass. Cold. Normal. I stood there for a second, confused. Then I pulled my hand back. The warmth was still there, but it wasn't coming from the window itself. It was in the air, right in front of it, like a patch. I moved my hand through it slowly. There was a definite difference, like passing your hand through a spot that had been warmed up, even though nothing was there now. My chest tightened. I stepped back slightly. The warm patch stayed where it was, didn't move with me, didn't spread, just hung there. I stared at it, even though there was nothing visible. "All right," I said quietly, more to myself than anything. I stepped closer again. The warmth felt more noticeable now that I was focused on it. I raised my hand again and moved it through the same spot. Same sensation, like the air itself had been heated, but only in that one area. I glanced around the room again. Everything else felt normal. No other warm spots, no signs of anything. I turned back to the window. That's when I noticed something else. The curtains, not moving, but slightly out of place. The right side hung a little further back than it should have, like it had been pulled and not fully returned. I reached out and adjusted it. As I did, my hand passed through the warm spot again. Still there. I stepped back, putting a bit more distance between me and the window. The warmth didn't follow. It stayed in that same fixed position. I stood there for a long time just looking at it, trying to see something, anything. There was nothing. Just empty space. Eventually, I went back to bed. I didn't lie down straight away. I sat on the edge, watching the window. The warmth didn't spread, didn't fade. It just stayed. After a while, I lay back, but I kept my eyes open. At some point, I must have drifted off again. When I woke up properly, it was light outside, around 8. Everything felt normal. I got up and went straight to the window. The warm spot was gone. The air felt the same everywhere. The curtains were hanging normally. I opened the window this time, let some fresh air in. Nothing unusual. I told myself it had been nothing. Just half-asleep confusion. But later, when I was getting dressed, I noticed something on the inside of the glass. Faint. Hard to see unless the light hit it right. A mark. Not a fingerprint, not smudged, just a slightly clearer patch, like the condensation had formed around it, but not on it. Oval-shaped, about the size of a hand, right where the warmth had been. I noticed it because of the reflection. I was driving back from a late shift somewhere between Buxton and Macclesfield on one of those long, empty roads that cut through open land. No houses, no streetlights, just fields and the occasional stone wall. It was just after 2 a.m., cold, clear night. No clouds. My headlights were the only light on the road. I'd been driving for maybe 20 minutes, just zoning out a bit, when something flashed above me, not in front. Above. It was quick, just a flicker, like when light hits something reflective at the right angle. I glanced up instinctively, but there was nothing there. I slowed slightly, scanning the road ahead. Probably a bird, I said out loud, even though it didn't sound right. There wasn't any movement after that. I kept driving. A minute or so later, it happened again. Same thing. A sharp reflection, like my headlights had caught something metallic. I looked up immediately this time, and I saw it. For maybe a second. Something high above the road, not directly overhead, but slightly ahead of me. It wasn't clear. Just a shape. Flat, maybe. Hard to tell. But it caught the light again as it tilted slightly. That's the part I remember clearly. It tilted, like something adjusting its angle. Then it vanished. Not moved off, not drifted away. It just went up. Fast. Straight up, out of sight in a fraction of a second. I hit the brake without thinking. The car slowed hard, tires crunching slightly on the rough surface. I pulled over to the side of the road and just sat there, engine running, lights still on. I stared up through the windshield. Nothing, just a clear sky. Stars, no movement. I turned off the engine. The sudden silence made everything feel sharper. I opened the door and stepped out. The air was cold. Still, no wind. I walked a few steps away from the car, looking straight up. Nothing, no sound, no sign of anything. I turned slowly, scanning the sky in all directions. Completely empty. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But I knew I hadn't. I'd seen the reflection twice. Seen it tilt, seen it go. I got back in the car and started the engine again. The headlights came back on, cutting into the road ahead. I hesitated for a second, then pulled back onto the road. I drove slower now, eyes flicking up every few seconds. Nothing happened. A few minutes passed. Then I noticed something else. The road ahead looked slightly off. Not in a clear way, just darker than it should have been. Like the headlights weren't reaching as far. I checked my lights. They were on full beam. I flicked them off and on again. No change. The beam still seemed shorter than usual. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see further. The edges of the road faded into darkness sooner than they should have. The fields on either side looked flat, like they weren't reflecting any light. I swallowed, gripping the wheel tighter. "Just keep driving," I said quietly. I kept my eyes on the road. Didn't look up again. After a while, I started to hear something. A faint sound. Low. Not quite a hum. More like pressure in my ears. Subtle, but there. I shook my head slightly, trying to clear it. The sound didn't change. It didn't come from any direction. Just sat there, under everything. I pressed the accelerator a bit more. The car picked up speed. The sound stayed the same. Then, without warning, the headlights flared brighter, not by much, just enough to notice. And in that moment, I saw it again, directly above me this time. Closer, much closer. A shape, flat, wide. It caught the light for a split second. Metallic, not shiny, but reflective in a dull way, like brushed metal. I couldn't make out any detail beyond that. No edges, no markings, just the surface. It tilted slightly, same as before. And then, gone. Upward, instant. I slammed the brake. The car skidded slightly before stopping. My heart was pounding now. I looked up through the windshield. Nothing. I threw the door open and got out again. Looked straight up. Empty sky. No sound. No movement. The ringing in my ears faded slowly. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to steady myself. After a minute or two, I got back in the car. I didn't want to stay there. I started the engine again. The headlights came on. Normal brightness. This for normal range. The road ahead looked right again. I pulled back onto the road and drove. Didn't stop this time, didn't slow down, just kept going until I reached a more populated area. Streetlights, houses, something normal. When I finally got home, I sat in the driveway for a minute before getting out. I didn't look up, I just went inside. The next morning, I went back out to the car. I don't know what I expected to find, but when I looked at the roof, I noticed something. A faint mark, not a dent, not a scratch, just a slightly different texture in the paint, oval-shaped, about the size of a dinner plate. Right in the center. The power went out without any warning. 1 second I was in the kitchen rinsing a mug, the next everything just dropped. Lights, fridge, the low hum of the house, all gone at once. It was already dark outside. Late evening, maybe around 9:30. The kind of damp, overcast night where the clouds sit low and you don't see any stars. I stood there for a second, hands still under the tap, waiting for something to click back on. Nothing did. Great, I muttered, turning the tap off. The silence settled in pretty quickly. Not total silence, there was still the faint sound of rain against the windows, but everything inside felt empty. I walked into the hallway and grabbed my phone off the table. No signal. That didn't happen often where I lived, just outside a small village near Durham. Usually, even during outages, the signal held. I frowned and held the phone up, like that might help. Still nothing. I turned on the flashlight and headed toward the front room. The beam felt narrow, like it wasn't reaching as far as it should. Probably just the darkness making it seem that way. I pulled the curtain back slightly and looked outside. The whole street was dark. No house lights, no street lamps, just silhouettes of cars and rooftops against the low clouds. I could hear a few distant voices, people stepping outside, calling to each other. I watched for a minute, then stepped back. The air inside felt cooler already without the heating. I decided to go out and check if anyone knew what was going on. I grabbed a jacket and stepped onto the front path. The rain was light but steady. A couple of neighbors were outside. Mrs. Clark from 2 doors down stood under her porch talking to someone across the street. "Power's out your side too?" she called. "Yeah," I said. "Any idea why?" "Not a clue. Must be the whole area." I nodded and stepped further out onto the pavement. The sky looked strange, not in a dramatic way, just heavier. The clouds were low, thick, but there was something about the way they sat that felt off. I glanced up again, longer this time. That's when I noticed the glow. It was faint, really faint, but it was there. A soft light behind the clouds, spreading out unevenly. At first I thought it might be the city, light pollution pushing through the cloud cover. But it didn't look like that. It wasn't orange. It was pale, almost white, but slightly off. I narrowed my eyes, trying to focus on it. The glow stayed steady for a few seconds. Then it shifted. Not across the sky, within the clouds, like something moving behind them, but without a clear shape. I took a step forward without realizing it. "Do you see that?" I asked, half turning toward Mrs. Clark. She looked up briefly. "See what?" "That light." She squinted for a moment, then shook her head. "Just clouds." I looked back up. The glow was still there, still faint, but more noticeable now that I was focused on it. The rain seemed to soften, not stop, just less. The street felt quieter. The voices faded. I realized I couldn't hear anyone talking anymore. I glanced around. People were still there. Mrs. Clark was still on her porch, but no one was speaking. Or if they were, I couldn't hear it. I turned back to the sky. The glow spread slightly, like it was filling more of the cloud cover. It didn't brighten, just expanded. The edges of it were soft, blending into the darker clouds around it. I felt that same pressure in my ears again, not painful, just noticeable, like being in a plane before your ears adjust. I swallowed. It didn't help. The glow shifted again. This time it seemed to move upward, not in a straight line, more like it was pulling away. The clouds above it thinned slightly, just enough to show a darker layer beyond. I stood there, watching, trying to understand what I was looking at. There was no shape, no clear source, just that pale light moving behind the cloud layer. Then it started to fade, slowly, evenly, like someone dimming it down. The pressure in my ears eased slightly as it did. The rain picked up again. I heard voices return. "Probably just the grid," someone was saying. I blinked. The glow was almost gone now, just a faint hint left in the clouds. Then it disappeared completely. The sky went back to its normal dark gray. A second later, the streetlights flickered on one by one. Then the houses, lights coming back through windows. A low hum returned as things powered up. I stood there for a second longer, looking up. Nothing unusual, just clouds. "Back on," Mrs. Clark called. "Yeah," I said, still staring at the sky. I went back inside. The house felt normal again. Warm, familiar. I put my phone on the table. Signal bars came back immediately. I stood in the kitchen for a minute, replaying what I'd seen, trying to match it to something normal. Lightning, maybe, but it hadn't flashed, hadn't been sharp or sudden. It had moved, slowly. I shook my head and turned the kettle on. As it started to heat, I glanced out the window one more time. The clouds were still low, still thick, but there was no sign of that glow anymore. Just darkness. I felt it through the seat before I heard anything. Just a quick vibration, like someone had tapped the underside of the car. Not hard, not enough to jolt me, just enough that I noticed it. I looked up from my phone straight away. The engine was off. Keys out. I'd been parked there for a while. I was in a small lay-by just outside Aberystwyth, overlooking the coast. It was late, around midnight, and I'd pulled over after a long drive because I was too tired to keep going. There were no other cars around, no houses nearby, just the road, a low stone wall, and the drop down toward the water somewhere out in the dark. I sat still, listening. Nothing. No follow-up sound. No engine noise, no footsteps, no wind. Just the quiet. I shifted slightly in the seat. No vibration this time. "Probably nothing," I said under my breath. I went back to my phone for a second, then paused. Something felt off. I glanced up at the rearview mirror. There was a faint glow, not bright, just enough to notice. It wasn't lighting anything up in the car, it just sat there in the mirror. It sat there in the mirror, like a dull patch of light in the reflection. I frowned and leaned forward slightly, trying to get a back window looked normal beyond it. Dark. Empty. The glow didn't seem to be coming from outside, in a normal way. It wasn't like headlights. It didn't flare or reflect properly. It just stayed. I twisted slightly in my seat and looked over my shoulder. Nothing. Just darkness. I turned back to the mirror. The glow was still there. Same position. Same faint intensity. I reached up and adjusted the mirror slightly. The glow moved with it, stayed centered in the reflection. That's when I felt the vibration again, stronger this time. A short, low tremor through the seat and the floor, like the car had briefly settled on something. I froze. The glow in the mirror flickered. Not like a light turning on and off. More like it shifted. Changed shape slightly. Then held again. My chest tightened. I put my phone down on the passenger seat. The silence outside felt heavier now. I listened carefully. Still nothing. No engine, no wind, no distant traffic, just that empty quiet. I slowly reached for the door handle. I didn't open it yet, just held it. The glow in the mirror stayed steady. I leaned forward again, squinting at it. It wasn't a clean shape. More like a soft patch. Slightly oval, faintly brighter at the center. I swallowed. All right, I opened the door. The moment I stepped out, the glow vanished, completely. The mirror just showed darkness again. I stood there beside the car, door still open, looking around. The air was cold, still, no sound. I walked slowly around to the back of the car. Nothing there. No lights, no movement. I looked out toward the road, empty, then toward the drop-off. Too dark to see much, just the suggestion of the landscape falling away. I stood there for a minute trying to hear anything. Nothing. I walked back to the driver's side and leaned in, looking at the mirror again. No glow. Just my own reflection, faintly visible. I hesitated. Then I got back in and closed the door. The moment it shut, the glow returned, exactly where it had been before. Same faint patch in the mirror. I felt the vibration again. Short, low, through the seat. I grabbed the steering wheel without thinking. The car wasn't moving. The glow flickered again, shifted slightly, then steadied. I turned the key and started the engine. The dashboard lit up. The headlights came on. The glow in the mirror didn't change. Didn't get washed out, didn't react to the light. It just stayed. I checked the side mirrors. Nothing unusual. I checked over my shoulder again. Nothing. But when I looked back at the rear view, the glow had moved. Slightly higher now. Still centered in the mirror, but higher, like it had risen. I felt the vibration again. Longer this time. A low, steady hum through the seat and pedals. Not loud, just enough to feel. My ears picked up a faint pressure. Same kind of sensation you get when something changes in the air. I tightened my grip on the wheel. "All right, I'm leaving," I said, even though I was alone. I put the car into gear. The glow stayed, didn't shift, didn't fade. I pulled out of the lay-by slowly. As the car moved forward, the glow remained in the mirror. Same position, same distance, like it was fixed relative to me. I accelerated slightly. The road ahead was clear. The glow didn't get smaller, didn't fall behind. It stayed perfectly. After maybe 10 seconds, the vibration stopped completely. The pressure in my ears eased, and the glow faded slowly, evenly, until it was gone. The mirror just showed darkness again. I didn't slow down. I kept driving. Faster now. Not speeding, but faster than I had been. The road curved slightly along the coast. I checked the mirror again. Nothing. Just empty road behind me. After a few minutes, I reached a stretch with streetlights. The normal glow of them felt reassuring. I drove another 10 minutes before pulling over again, this time near a petrol station that was closed for the night but still lit. I parked under one of the lights and turned the engine off. Sat there for a minute, listening. Nothing unusual, no vibration, no pressure. I leaned forward and looked at the rearview mirror again. Normal, just the empty road behind me. I got out of the car and walked around to the back. The metal felt slightly warm under my hand, not hot, just warmer than the rest of the car. I stood there for a bit, looking at the rear window. Nothing there. No marks. No signs of anything. When I got back in, I adjusted the mirror again, just to be sure. No glow. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping. Didn't look in the mirror much. Just kept my eyes on the road. But every now and then, I felt like something was still there, just out of view. I noticed the compass before I noticed anything else. It was subtle at first, just a slight wobble in the needle when I checked it, like it hadn't settled properly. I tapped the casing with my finger, thinking it was just stuck. It didn't snap back like it should. It drifted, not wildly. Just a slow, steady movement off north, then back, then off again. I frowned and held it still in my hand. "Come on," I muttered. I was on a ridge path in the Peak District, somewhere above a dale. Not a difficult hike, just a long one. I'd started late afternoon, planning to catch the sunset and head back before it got too dark. The weather had been clear earlier, but by the time I reached the ridge, the sky had turned that dull gray blue you get just before night fully sets in. No wind, which was strange in itself up there. I checked the compass again. The needle was still drifting, not spinning, just refusing to settle. I looked up, scanning the horizon. Nothing unusual. Rolling hills, darkening sky, no lights anywhere. I pulled my phone out and checked the map. Signal was weak, but still there. Location looked right. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and kept walking. The path was narrow, gravel underfoot, dropping off on either side into darker slopes. I glanced at the compass again. Still off. Probably just interference, I said to myself. Didn't really know what would cause it out there, but it sounded reasonable enough. I kept moving. A few minutes passed. The light dropped further. That soft blue-gray turning into something darker. I slowed slightly, more out of habit than anything. That's when I noticed the silence. Not complete silence, but thinner, like something had been pulled out of the air. No wind, still. But even the distant sounds you usually get, birds, maybe a far-off car, weren't there. Just my footsteps and my breathing. I stopped walking, stood still, listened. Nothing. I checked the compass again. The needle had drifted further now, pointing somewhere between north and east, but not quite either. I turned slowly in place, watching it. It didn't adjust the way it should. It lagged behind my movement, then slid slightly past where it should have stopped. I swallowed. All right. I looked up again. The horizon line was still clear, dark shapes of hills against a slightly lighter sky. Everything looked normal, but it didn't feel right. I took a few more steps along the ridge. The gravel crunched under my boots, louder than it should have been. Each step felt too sharp in the quiet. I checked the compass again, still drifting, not correcting. I stopped again. That's when I saw the glow. It was faint, barely there. Just above the horizon, slightly to my left, a soft pulse. Not bright, just enough to notice. It lasted maybe a second. Then it was gone. I blinked, staring at the spot. Nothing, just the dark line of the hills. I stood there, waiting. Nothing happened. I told myself it was just something distant. A car, maybe. Light reflecting off something. Didn't make sense, but it was something. I started walking again, slower now, more aware. The silence pressed in a bit more. I became aware of my breathing again, too loud. I tried to breathe quieter, didn't help. I checked the compass. The needle had shifted again, now pointing somewhere else entirely, not even close to north. I stopped, turned in a slow circle. The needle followed, but not correctly. It moved like it was delayed, like it was catching up. I felt a tightness in my chest. I looked back toward where I'd come from. The path was still there, faint but visible. I could head back, probably should. I turned slightly, angling my body that way. The compass needle slid again, then stopped, pointing directly ahead, not north, just ahead. I frowned. That wasn't how it should work. I lifted it higher, holding it steady. The needle didn't move. I lowered it, still fixed. I looked up. The horizon in front of me looked the same as before, but something felt off, like the distance was wrong, like it was closer than it should be. I took a step forward, then another. The silence deepened. Even my footsteps sounded duller now, less sharp. I glanced back again. The path behind me looked slightly blurred. Not visibly, exactly, just harder to focus on. I turned back toward the front. That's when the glow came again. Same spot, just above the horizon. A soft pulse, brighter this time, still not illuminating anything around it, just existing. It held for a fraction longer, then faded. Gone. I stopped walking. My hands felt cold. I checked the compass again. The needle was still pointing forward, unmoving. I turned slowly to the right. The needle didn't follow. It stayed fixed. I turned further. Still didn't move. It was no longer responding to direction. It was locked. I looked up again. The horizon felt closer now. I couldn't explain it. The shape of the hills hadn't changed, but the distance felt reduced, like something had shifted. I took a step back. The needle didn't move. I took another. The silence stayed. Heavy. Pressing. I turned fully around. The path behind me looked normal again. Clearer. More solid. I didn't think about it. I just started walking back. Faster now. Not running, but close. The gravel crunched louder again. The sound returned slightly. Not fully, but enough. I didn't look back. I kept my eyes on the path. After a few minutes, I checked the compass again. The needle snapped. Suddenly. Back to north. Steady. Normal. I stopped, turned slowly. It followed correctly this time. No drift, no delay. I let out a breath. I hadn't realized I'd been holding it. I looked back toward the horizon. No glow, no change. Just dark hills. The silence lifted gradually. Wind returned, faint at first, then more noticeable. I stood there for a minute, then kept walking back. When I reached the lower part of the trail, the air felt normal again. Sounds came back fully. Distant cars, wind through grass, everything. I didn't stop until I reached the car park. When I got there, I checked the compass one more time. Perfectly steady, pointing north, like nothing had happened. But when I looked up at the ridge one last time, the horizon line seemed further away than I remembered. I didn't think anything of it until Mrs. Patel knocked on my door. It was just after 9 in the morning. I'd barely had coffee, still half out of it, when I heard the knock. Firm, a bit urgent. I opened the door and she was standing there in her dressing gown, looking more serious than I'd ever seen her. "Were you awake last night?" she asked straight away. I blinked. No. Why?" She glanced over her shoulder toward my house, then back at me. "There were lights." I frowned. "What kind of lights?" "Above your roof," she said, "just hovering there." I didn't respond straight away. Mrs. Patel wasn't the type to joke around or exaggerate things. She was usually calm, practical, the kind of person who double-checks everything before saying anything. "What time?" I asked. "Late. Around 3, maybe. I couldn't sleep." She paused. "They weren't like normal lights." I leaned against the doorframe. Could have been a drone or something. She shook her head immediately. No sound, and they didn't move properly. That made me pause. "What do you mean?" "They stayed still for a while," she said. "Then they shifted, but not like flying, more like sliding." I rubbed my face. "And they were over my house?" "Yes." I looked up instinctively, even though it was broad daylight now. Nothing there but gray sky. "I didn't hear anything," I said. She nodded slowly. "That's what worried me." We stood there for a second. Then she said, "You have those cameras, don't you?" I glanced back inside. "Yeah." "You should check them." I nodded. "Yeah, I will." She gave a small, tight smile and turned to head back to her place. I closed the door and stood there for a moment, thinking. Then I went straight to the living room and pulled up the camera app on my phone. I had 3 cameras, front door, back garden, and one covering the driveway. I scrolled back through the night recordings. Nothing unusual at first. Just the usual clips. Passing cars, a fox at one point, nothing out of the ordinary. I skipped ahead to around 3 a.m. There was a motion alert at Zoo 312. I tapped it. The footage loaded. At first, everything looked normal. The driveway, the front of the house, still and quiet. Then the image flickered, not like a normal glitch. It washed slightly brighter for a fraction of a second, then darker, then normal again. I frowned and scrubbed back, played it again. Same thing. Flicker. Then, for 2 or 3 frames, the image distorted. Not fully corrupted, just stretched, like the picture had been pulled slightly upward, then it snapped back. I leaned closer to the screen. What the hell? I paused it right at the distortion, zoomed in. There wasn't anything clear in it, no shape, no object, just the image itself bending. I let it play. A few seconds later, it happened again. Another flicker, another brief distortion, then normal. I checked the timestamp, 03:12:18. Then it jumped. I blinked, I scrubbed back again. The footage skipped those seconds entirely. No frames, no recording, just a jump. I sat back slowly. That's weird. I checked the next clip. Another motion alert. I opened it. Same thing. Normal footage, then a flicker, then a few corrupted frames, then normal again. I fast-forwarded through it. The pattern repeated. Every time the image flickered, there was a small gap in the timestamp, a few seconds missing. I felt that tightness in my chest again. I switched to the back garden camera, scrolled to the same time, opened the clip. This one was worse. The flicker was brighter, almost like the exposure had been pushed too high. For a split second, the whole frame washed out. Then came back. I paused it, zoomed in. There was something different here. At the top edge of the frame, a faint shape. Not clear, just a darker area against the sky. I scrubbed through frame by frame. It wasn't consistent. It appeared in one frame, gone in the next, then back again. Each time, the timestamp skipped forward slightly. I leaned back, staring at the screen, trying to piece it together. I checked the driveway camera next. Same pattern, flicker, distortion, missing seconds. But in one of the frames, I saw something, very briefly. Near the roofline of the house, a faint outline, not solid, more like a suggestion of something, a darker shape against the sky. But it didn't stay long enough to make sense of it. It was gone almost immediately. I paused it again, zoomed in. The image broke apart slightly under zoom, pixelated, unclear. I sat there for a long time, just staring at it, trying to convince myself it was just camera error, glitching. But the timing didn't feel random. It lined up, across all 3 cameras. Same flickers, same missing time. I checked the system logs. No errors, no warnings, everything showed as functioning normally. I leaned back in the chair, running a hand over my face. Then I noticed something else, the indoor camera. I hadn't even thought to check it. It faced the hallway. I pulled it up, scrolled to the same time, 03:12. Opened the clip. The hallway looked normal, dark, still. Then the flicker happened, same as the others. But this time, the light didn't just flicker, it dimmed, like something had blocked it. The frame darkened for a moment, then returned. I leaned forward again, replayed it. The dimming wasn't even. It came from above, like a shadow passing overhead, inside the house. I paused it at the darkest frame, zoomed in. The ceiling looked normal, but the light level had dropped, just for that instant. Then it returned. I checked the timestamp. Then it jumped to 27. 6 seconds missing. I sat there, staring at the screen. The house felt quieter than it should have been. I glanced toward the hallway. Everything looked normal. Light coming in from the front door window, nothing out of place. But for a second, I had this feeling that whatever had caused that flicker hadn't just been outside. I noticed it because my shadow didn't match me. I just turned onto my street, keys already in my hand, thinking about nothing in particular. It was late, maybe around 11:40, and the street was quiet. Most of the houses had their lights off. There was one street lamp halfway down the road, casting that dull orange glow that barely reaches the pavement. I stepped into it, and my shadow stretched out ahead of me, like it always does. Except it didn't quite move when I did. I took another step, My shadow stayed where it was for a split second, then snapped forward. I stopped walking. It stopped too. I stood there, staring at it. "All right," I said quietly. I took another step, slower this time, watching carefully. For a moment, everything matched. Then it happened again. My foot moved forward. My shadow hesitated, just slightly, then caught up. My chest tightened. I looked up at the street lamp. It was steady. No flicker. Nothing unusual about it. I looked back down. My shadow looked normal again. I shifted my weight side to side. It followed perfectly. I let out a small breath, almost laughing. "Just your eyes," I muttered. I started walking again. Slowly at first, then normal pace. Everything seemed fine. The shadow moved with me like it should. I got about halfway past the lamp when I noticed something else. The light felt dimmer. Not dramatically, just less present. I glanced up again. The bulb still looked the same, but the light on the ground felt weaker. I looked down. My shadow was still there, but softer, less defined. I took another step. It lagged again. Longer this time. Not just a flicker, a noticeable delay. I stopped immediately. My shadow didn't. It kept moving. One more step forward, then stopped. My stomach dropped. I stood completely still. My shadow was slightly ahead of me now, not by much, just enough to notice. I didn't move, neither did it. We just stayed like that for a few seconds, then slowly it shifted back, lining up with me again. Perfectly. I swallowed hard. The air felt heavier. I looked up. That's when I noticed the light overhead, not the street lamp, above it. Faint, barely visible against the night sky, a dim glow, not bright enough to light anything up, just a soft patch, hovering. I stared at it. It didn't move, didn't flicker, just sat there. I felt that same pressure in my ears again. Subtle. But there, I looked back down at my shadow. It looked normal. I moved my hand slightly. It followed. No delay. I took a step. It moved with me. I looked up again. The glow was still there, same position, same faint intensity. I took another step. The light dimmed slightly, just a fraction. I stopped. It steadied. I took a breath. Then I stepped forward again. The glow faded a little more. My shadow stayed aligned perfectly. I kept walking, slow, deliberate steps. The glow overhead continued to dim. Not suddenly, gradually, like it was being dialed down. The pressure in my ears eased with it. I didn't look away. I kept my eyes on that faint patch in the sky. Step by step, it got weaker, harder to see, until it was almost gone. Then, just as I reached the edge of the street lamp's light, it disappeared, completely. The sky went back to normal, just dark, empty. I looked down. My shadow was normal, sharp again under the street lamp. No delay, no movement on its own. I stood there for a second, breathing slowly, trying to steady myself. Then I turned and looked back down the street. Nothing there. No glow, no change, just the quiet road. I walked the rest of the way home without stopping. Didn't look up again. Just kept my eyes on the pavement. When I got to my front door, I fumbled the key slightly, hands shaking more than I expected. I got inside and shut the door behind me, locked it. The house felt normal, warm, quiet. I stood in the hallway for a minute, listening, nothing unusual. I went into the living room and sat down, tried to distract myself, turned on the TV, didn't really watch it. After a while, I got up and went to the window, pulled the curtain back slightly, looked out at the street. Everything looked the same, street lamp still on, empty road, no glow in the sky. I looked down at the pavement, trying to see where I'd been standing. Nothing stood out, no marks, no difference. I let the curtain fall back into place, went upstairs, got ready for bed. When I turned off the light and lay down, I stared at the ceiling for a while, just thinking. Eventually, I closed my eyes. But right before I fell asleep, I had this brief thought that for that 1 second, when my shadow moved on its own, it hadn't been following me. It had been ahead of me. I noticed it because the birds hadn't started yet. That was the first thing that felt off. I was already awake, lying on my back, staring at the ceiling, waiting for morning to come in properly. It was one of those nights where you don't really sleep, you just drift in and out. I checked my phone, 5:07 a.m., just before sunrise. Normally by then you'd hear something. Birds starting up, wind picking up a bit, that slow shift from night to morning. There was nothing. The house felt still. Too still. I sat up and listened. No sound from outside at all. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up, walking to the window. The curtains were slightly open already, just enough to see the sky. It was still dark, but not fully. That deep blue, just before it starts to lighten. I stood there for a second, waiting. Then the light came, but not the way it should. It didn't spread across the horizon. It didn't gradually brighten the whole sky. It appeared as a narrow vertical band, straight up from the horizon, like a column. I frowned, leaning closer to the glass. The band was pale, not bright like sunlight, more like a soft white glow. It stretched upward, maybe a few degrees wide, cutting straight through the darker sky. Everything around it stayed dim. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. That's not right. I pulled the curtain open a bit more. The band stayed fixed, didn't widen, didn't spread, just held its shape. The rest of the horizon remained dark. I pressed my hand lightly against the glass. Cold, normal, but the air in the room felt slightly heavier. I kept staring at the sky. The band didn't flicker, didn't pulse, just stayed there, perfectly straight. I glanced to the left and right, expecting to see the usual light starting to creep in. Nothing, just darkness. The band was the only light. I checked the time again, 5:09 a.m. I looked back up. It was still there. Same size, same position. I had this weird thought that it wasn't getting brighter. It wasn't behaving like sunrise at all. It was just present. I stepped back from the window slightly, trying to take in more of the sky. The edges of the band were too clean, too defined. There wasn't any gradual fade into the darker sky. It just stopped, like someone had drawn a line. I felt that faint pressure in my ears again. Not strong, just noticeable. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I moved closer to the window again. The band seemed slightly more intense now, not brighter exactly, just more solid. I couldn't see anything within it. No clouds, no shapes, just that uniform pale light. I stood there for what felt like a long time, watching, waiting for it to change. It didn't. Then, slowly, it started to move, not sideways, up. The entire band shifted upward, still perfectly straight, still the same width, just lifting. I felt my chest tighten. I stepped closer to the glass without realizing it. The band continued rising. The bottom edge pulled away from the horizon, leaving darkness behind it, like it was retracting. The top edge stayed out of view beyond the upper frame of my window. I craned my neck slightly, trying to follow it. It kept going. Same speed, smooth, silent. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I held my breath. The band thinned as it rose, not in width, but in intensity. The light became weaker, fainter. Then, just before it disappeared completely, it faded. Gone. The sky went back to normal. Dark blue. Then, almost immediately, the real sunrise started, gradual. Soft light spreading across the horizon. Birds began, one, then another, the normal sounds of morning returning. I stood there, still staring at where the band had been. Everything looked exactly how it should now, like nothing had happened. I checked the time again, 5:12 a.m. Only a few minutes had passed. It felt longer. I stayed by the window as the sky brightened properly, watching the normal sunrise take over. The light spread evenly this time. No sharp edges, no vertical line, just the usual slow transition. After a while, I stepped back and let the curtain fall. The room filled with normal daylight. I went downstairs, made coffee, tried to shake the feeling, but something about it stuck. That clean edge, that upward movement. Later, when the sun was fully up, I went outside. Stood on the pavement and looked toward the horizon. Everything looked normal. No sign of anything unusual. But for a moment, I had this strange sense that the light I'd seen earlier hadn't been coming from the sun at all. I live on the 4th floor of a concrete apartment block in Sheffield. It's one of those older buildings with narrow stairwells, no lift, and those small rectangular windows between floors that barely let in any light during the day. At night, they're usually just black. That evening was normal. I'd been out picking up food and got back around 11:40. Ate in the kitchen, watched something for a bit, then realized I'd left my water bottle in the car. I didn't feel like going all the way down, but I also knew I'd forget it by morning. So I grabbed my keys and stepped out into the hallway. The building was quiet. No voices through the walls, no doors opening or closing, just that faint, constant hum you don't notice until it's gone, the electricity running through everything. Lights in the corridor were dim but steady. I pushed open the stairwell door and started down. The stairwell always smells the same: dust, damp concrete, a bit of metal. The overhead lights are spaced out, so you get these pockets of shadow between them. I walked down from the fourth to the third without really thinking about it, just counting the steps out of habit. That's when I noticed the light. It was coming through the window between the third and second floors. At first, I thought it was just a car pulling into the lot outside, headlights hitting at the right angle. But this was brighter and steady, not yellow like streetlights, not warm like headlights, white, pale, almost bluish. It filled the entire stairwell between those two flights, spilling up the walls and onto the steps. It didn't flicker or shift. It just sat there, constant. I slowed down. The hum of the building was still there at that point, faint but present. I took another step down, then it stopped. Not faded, not dipped, stopped. The hum, the background noise, even the slight buzz from the overhead light above me, gone. The silence was immediate and heavy, like someone had closed a door on sound itself. I froze halfway between steps. The light didn't change. It stayed just as bright, filling the space below me. But without the hum, it felt wrong, like it didn't belong to the building. I looked down toward the next landing. The window was glowing so brightly I couldn't see anything beyond it, just a flat, even light, like a sheet. I remember thinking I should turn around, just go back up, forget the water bottle. But I didn't move. Something about the stillness held me there. I took another step down. The air felt different, not warmer or colder, just thicker. Like moving through it took a bit more effort than it should have. My ears popped, sharp, sudden. I winced and swallowed, trying to clear it. The pressure stayed, sitting just behind my eyes. I gripped the handrail. The metal felt slightly off under my fingers, not vibrating, not cold, just less solid somehow. I looked at the wall. For a second, I thought it was moving, not the whole thing, just the surface, like a faint ripple passing through it, the way heat distorts the air above pavement. Then it settled again. The light pulsed, not a flicker, a slow, subtle brightening, then dimming, like breathing. I felt it in my chest more than I saw it, a slight shift, in and out. I opened my mouth to say something, just to break the silence, but no sound came out at first. Then when it did, it sounded flat, like it wasn't carrying properly. I took another step down. The light filled my vision more now. The edges of the stairwell faded, everything soft and slightly blurred. The pressure in my ears increased. My fingers tingled where they held the rail. The light pulsed again. And then the hum came back. All at once, the overhead light buzzed. I heard a distant door slam somewhere in the building. Pipes rattled faintly in the walls. I blinked. The light was gone. The window between floors was dark again, just reflecting the faint glow from the stairwell lights. I looked around. Everything was normal. I was standing on a landing, not the third, the second. I stopped breathing for a second. I looked up. The flight of stairs above me led to the third floor. I could see the door there, closed like it always was. I looked down. Another flight led to the first. I stood there trying to piece together how I'd gotten there. I didn't remember walking down that last flight. I remembered stopping on the third, seeing the light, stepping down toward it. But I didn't remember reaching the landing below. I checked my phone, 12:19. I frowned. I'd left my flat at 11:52. There was no way I'd been in the stairwell for over 20 minutes. It hadn't felt like that. It had felt like a few minutes, maybe less. I stood there for a while, just listening to the normal sounds of the building. Someone's TV through a wall, the faint hum back in place. Everything felt ordinary again. Eventually, I went the rest of the way down, grabbed my water bottle from the car, and came back up. When I passed the window between the third and second floors again, I stopped. Looked at it. Nothing. Just black glass, faintly reflecting the stairwell. I went back to my flat and locked the door. Didn't turn any lights off for a while. Since then, I've noticed something. Sometimes, when I'm going down those stairs late at night, the hum will drop for just a second. Not completely, just enough that I notice it. And I always look toward that window, just in case the light comes back. I noticed it because the fog didn't look right. It was one of those early morning drives, just before sunrise, when everything's quiet and the roads are empty. I was cutting through farmland to get to a job out near Wilmslow, taking the smaller roads to avoid the motorway. There was fog, but not heavy. Just low, patchy stuff sitting over the fields, drifting slowly across the road in places. My headlights cut through it fine. Nothing unusual at first. I had the radio low, barely paying attention, just following the road. Then I saw the glow. At first, I thought it was headlights from another car somewhere ahead, maybe dipping behind a hill or something. But it wasn't above the fog, it was under it. A soft light spreading across the ground beneath the mist. Not bright, just enough to make the fog look like it was lit from below. I slowed down slightly, trying to figure out where it was coming from. There were no buildings nearby, no houses, just open fields on both sides. The glow moved, slowly, but not with the fog. The fog was drifting left, pushed by a light breeze. The glow moved right, against it. I frowned, leaning forward slightly. The light didn't flicker, didn't change intensity, just glided under the fog like something moving beneath a surface. I eased off the accelerator, the car slowed, the headlights stretched further ahead. The glow became clearer. It wasn't a single point, more like a patch. Diffuse, soft-edged, but distinct from the darkness around it. I rolled the window down a bit. Cold air came in, damp, quiet, no sound, no engine, no hum, nothing. The glow kept moving. Still against the direction of the fog, I checked my mirrors out of habit. Nothing behind me. Empty road. I looked ahead again. The glow had shifted further across the field. Keeping a steady pace, I tapped the brake lightly. The car slowed to maybe 30. The glow didn't react, didn't change speed, just kept moving. I felt that quiet tension settle in, not fear, just something not lining up. I kept watching it, trying to match it to something real. Vehicle lights, machinery, anything. But there was nothing, no shapes, no silhouettes, just that soft light beneath the fog. Then it changed direction, not gradually, it just turned. The movement shifted from right to left, still under the fog, still smooth, still silent. I felt a slight pressure in my ears, subtle, like when you're driving up a hill. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I slowed down more, the car almost coasting now. The glow moved closer to the road, not directly toward me, just drifting in that direction. I gripped the steering wheel a bit tighter, watching it. The fog above it thickened slightly, or maybe it just looked that way because of the light. I couldn't tell. The pressure in my ears increased, a dull, steady weight. I checked my phone quickly. No signal. That wasn't unusual out there, but it stood out. I looked back at the field. The glow was closer now. Still no shape, still no source, just that light, moving. Then it stopped, right near the edge of the field, close to the road. I slowed to a near stop. The headlights illuminated the grass ahead, but the glow didn't reflect off anything. It didn't brighten the ground. It just existed beneath the fog. Separate. I stared at it, trying to force my eyes to see something more. Anything. Then it shifted again. Not across the field. Up. Not into the sky. Just up into the fog. The light rose slightly. The fog above it lit up for a moment. Then the glow faded, not quickly, just gradually, like it was being dimmed. The pressure in my ears eased, slowly. The fog returned to its normal dull gray. No light beneath it. Nothing moving. I sat there for a few seconds, engine idling, listening. The world felt quiet again, normal. I checked the time. It didn't match. I was sure I'd only slowed down for a minute, maybe 2. The clock said nearly 15 had passed. I frowned, trying to piece it together. Then I looked back at the field. Nothing, just fog, drifting with the wind. I pulled the car forward slowly, drove past the spot. The headlights lit the ground normally. No glow, no movement, just empty field. But the way the light had moved, not with the fog, not with anything visible, felt less like something on the ground and more like something just beneath where I could see. I only noticed it because I'd been staring at the same part of the sky for too long. It was one of those nights where you go out just to clear your head. I'd driven out past the last row of houses, parked near a field gate, and sat on the hood of my car with the engine off. No lights nearby, no noise, just the sky. I do that sometimes. Not for anything specific, just to sit and not think about anything for a while. After a bit, your eyes adjust and you start picking out the same patterns. I'm not into astronomy or anything, but I recognize a few shapes. That's what I was doing. Looking at one particular patch of sky just above the tree line. At first, everything looked normal. Stars steady, no movement, then one of them dimmed. Not disappeared, just softened. I frowned slightly, thinking maybe a thin cloud had passed over it, but the rest of the stars around it didn't change. Just that one. I kept looking. It brightened again, back to where it had been, then dimmed, slow, even, like a steady rhythm. I sat up a bit, resting my elbows on my knees, focused on it. The moment I did, it stopped. Just a normal star again, no change. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd imagined it. I looked away for a second, then back. It stayed steady. I leaned back again, relaxing, tried not to stare directly at it, just watched the area. After a few seconds, it started again, that same slow dimming, then brightening. I felt that quiet tension start to build. Not fear, just confusion. I shifted slightly, trying to keep it in my peripheral vision. It kept pulsing, steady, like it wasn't random. I leaned forward again, focused on it directly. It stopped, completely stable. I exhaled slowly, realizing I'd been holding my breath. I looked away again, let my eyes drift across the sky, then back toward it. The pulsing resumed. I rubbed my face slightly, trying to stay grounded. Maybe it was something in my eyes, or the way I was focusing. But it didn't feel like that. It felt separate, like it was doing it on its own. I checked my phone out of habit. No signal. That wasn't unusual out there, but it stood out. I looked back up. The star was pulsing again, slow, consistent. I decided to test it. I fixed my gaze just to the side of it, not directly on it. It kept pulsing. I shifted my eyes directly onto it. It stopped, perfectly steady. I felt a slight pressure in my ears, barely noticeable, like a change in air pressure. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I looked away again. The pulsing resumed. I felt my chest tighten slightly. Still not fear, just that sense that something wasn't lining up. I leaned back on the hood of the car again, tried to relax, watched the sky without focusing too hard. The pulsing continued. Then something else changed. The stars around it looked slightly off, not moving, just positioned differently. Like the pattern had shifted by a fraction. I blinked, focused on the area. Everything snapped back to normal. I looked away again. The pulsing continued. I checked the time. It didn't match. I was sure I'd only been sitting there for maybe 15 minutes. The phone said it had been nearly 40. I frowned, trying to piece it together. Then I looked back up. The star was still pulsing, unchanged. I felt that pressure in my ears again, slightly stronger. Then I noticed something else. The air felt quieter, not silent, just muted, like the usual distant sounds had dropped out. I sat up slowly, looked around. Nothing had changed on the ground. The field was still, the road was empty. I looked back up. The star pulsed again. Then I focused on it directly. It stopped. I kept my gaze fixed on it this time, waiting. It didn't change, just a normal star. I held my focus there for maybe 10 seconds. Then I looked away. The moment I did, it resumed, that same steady rhythm. I stood up from the car. The metal creaked slightly under me, louder than it should have been. I kept my eyes on the sky, but not directly on that star. It kept pulsing. I felt the pressure in my ears peak, then ease. I looked directly at the star again. It stopped. I stayed there, staring at it, trying to force it to move. It didn't, just a fixed point of light. I looked away one last time. It pulsed again. Then slowly, it stopped on its own. Not because I looked at it. It just settled back into a normal, steady brightness. I waited, watched. Nothing changed. It stayed stable. I checked the time again. It didn't match. More time had passed than it should have. I stood there for a few seconds longer. Then I got back in the car, sat there with the engine off, looking up through the windshield. The sky looked normal, every star steady, no pulsing, no movement. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't stopped because it was done. It had stopped because I'd noticed it. The power went out while I was halfway through making tea. No flicker, no warning. Just everything cutting off at once. The lights, the kettle, even the faint hum from the fridge. I stood there for a second in the dark, hands still on the counter, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. I reached for my phone, turned the flashlight on, and stepped into the living room. The whole street was out. No porch lights, no street lights, nothing in any of the houses across from me. Just that dim gray outline of everything under the night sky. That part wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the sky. I didn't notice it right away. I was looking for movement, cars, people, anything. But there was nothing. Then my eyes adjusted a bit more, and I looked up. There was a patch of cloud above the houses, slightly off to the right, and it was glowing. Faint. Not bright enough to light anything below it. Just a soft, dull brightness inside the cloud itself. I stepped closer to the window. The glow didn't come from behind the clouds. It wasn't like light from the ground reflecting upward. It was inside them, contained, like something behind the cloud layer was lighting it from within. I frowned and opened the front door. Cold air came in. Still. No wind. I stepped outside onto the pavement. The silence hit me first. Not just quiet, empty. No distant traffic, no wind, nothing. Just stillness. I looked up again. The glowing patch hadn't moved. It stayed in the same part of the sky, holding its shape. The edges weren't sharp, but they were defined enough to stand out from the rest of the clouds. I stood there for a few seconds, watching it. Then it changed. Not suddenly, slowly. The brightness increased just a little, enough that I could start to see more detail in the cloud itself. Faint layers, slight movement inside it, not like wind pushing it, more like something behind it shifting. I felt a pressure in my ears. Subtle at first, then more noticeable. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I took a step forward onto the street. The pressure increased slightly. I looked around. No one else outside. No doors opening. No voices. Just me. I looked back up. The glow pulsed. Once. A slow increase in brightness, then back down. At the same time, the pressure peaked, then eased slightly. I stood there trying to make sense of it. The rest of the sky stayed dark. Only that one patch glowed. I checked my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual during a blackout, but it stood out. I looked back up. The glow shifted, not across the sky, just within itself. The brighter part moved slightly to one side, still contained in the same area. The edges adjusted, expanded a little, then pulled back. I felt that quiet tension settle in. Not fear, just confusion. I stepped back toward the house. The pressure eased again. I stopped, waited, then stepped forward again. It came back. I looked up. The glow was dimming now. Slowly, the brightness reduced, the details inside it faded, the edges softened. I stood still, watching it. The pressure in my ears dropped, gradually. Within a few seconds, the glow was barely visible. Then it was gone. The clouds looked normal again. Dark, flat. I stared at that spot for a few seconds longer, waiting. Nothing came back. And then, the power returned, all at once. Streetlights flicked on. Porch lights came back. I heard appliances inside the house start up again. The normal background noise rushed back in. It felt too loud after the silence. I blinked, looking around. Everything looked normal again. I checked my phone. Signal was back. Full bars. I looked at the time. It didn't match. I was sure the blackout had only lasted a few minutes. The phone said it had been closer to 20. I stood there for a bit longer, looking up at the sky. Nothing unusual. No glow. No movement. Just clouds, faintly lit now by the streetlights and distant town glow. I went back inside and shut the door. The house felt normal again, warm, familiar. But that patch of sky, the way it had lit up from inside, didn't feel like it had anything to do with the power going out. It just happened to end at the same time. I was already out on the water when I noticed it. It was early morning, just after sunrise, out on a small lake about 40 minutes from town. Not a popular spot, no cabins, no rentals, just a dirt path down to the shore and a place to launch a small boat if you know where to look. I'd taken my old aluminum boat out, the one with the small motor that barely makes any noise when it's idling. I like that lake because it's quiet. You can sit out there for hours and not see another person. That morning, the air was still. No wind at all. The surface of the water was flat, almost glassy, except for the small ripples from my boat. I'd killed the motor and let myself drift for a bit, cast my line out, just sat there. It was one of those mornings where everything feels slower. I remember looking down into the water at one point, just out of habit. It's usually too dark to see much. The lake's deep in the middle and the water's not that clear. But I noticed something. A faint glow, right beneath the boat. At first, I thought it was just light from the sky reflecting weirdly. But it didn't match the surface. The surface was still. The glow was coming from below. I leaned over the side, trying to get a better look. It wasn't bright, just a soft, dim light, kind of bluish. Not flickering, just there. It covered a small area under the boat, maybe a few feet across. I stayed still, watching it. The water itself wasn't disturbed, no ripples, no movement, just that glow sitting beneath me. I pulled my line in slowly, not wanting it hanging there. I don't know why, it just didn't feel right. As I did, I noticed something else. The glow wasn't fixed. It shifted slightly, not like it was following the current, more like it was adjusting its position. I held still. The boat drifted just a bit, barely noticeable. The glow stayed under me for a second. Then it started to move. Not randomly, not drifting. It moved in a straight line, away from the boat. Slow at first, then faster. Still completely silent, still not disturbing the surface. I leaned further over the side, trying to follow it with my eyes. The light slid under the water like it was on rails, perfectly straight, no wavering, no turbulence. The surface above it stayed smooth, no wake, nothing. It passed beyond the shadow of the boat and into the open water. I could see it more clearly then, a narrow shape, not round, more like an elongated patch of light. Soft edges, no defined structure. It kept moving, faster now, still straight. I stood up slowly in the boat, trying to keep it in view. My balance shifted slightly and the boat rocked, but the water around the glow didn't react at all. That's what stuck with me. Even with the boat moving, the surface above it stayed untouched. Like whatever was causing the light wasn't interacting with the water the way anything else would. I followed it with my eyes as far as I could. It didn't change direction, didn't slow down, just continued in that same straight path, until it was too faint to see, then it was gone. I stayed standing there for a second, looking at where it had disappeared. The lake looked normal again, flat, still, like nothing had been there. I sat back down slowly. My hands felt colder than they should have. I looked around the lake. No one else out there, no boats, no movement on the shore, just quiet. I picked up my line again, but I didn't cast it right away. I just held it, staring at the water, waiting to see if the glow would come back. It didn't. After a minute or two, I cast the line out again. It landed with a small splash, breaking the surface. The ripples spread out normally. Everything behaved the way it should. But I couldn't shake what I'd just seen. I reeled in slowly after a few minutes. Didn't get a bite. I checked the water again. Nothing. No glow. No movement. Just dark beneath the surface. I stayed out there for another hour. Nothing else happened. No strange lights. No changes. Just the usual. When I finally started the motor and headed back to shore, I kept glancing over the side, half expecting to see that glow again, but the water stayed the same. Later that day, I thought about what it could have been. Some kind of reflection, maybe. But the way it moved didn't match that. And the way it didn't disturb the water at all, that didn't match anything I knew. A few days later, I went back to the same spot, same time of morning, same conditions. The water looked normal. I drifted in the same area for a while. Nothing happened. But at one point, I leaned over the side again, looking down, and for a second, I had this strange feeling, like there was something under there, not moving, just there, watching from below the surface. I straightened up and sat back, didn't lean over again after that. The rest of the day was normal, but I didn't stay as long as I usually do, and I haven't gone back out there alone since. I felt it before I saw anything. Just a quick vibration through the seat, like something heavy had passed nearby underground. It wasn't strong, just enough to register. I looked up immediately, checking the mirrors out of habit. Nothing behind me. I was parked at the edge of a small coastal road, just above a stretch of rocky beach. I'd driven out there because I couldn't sleep. It was late, around 1 a.m., and the place was empty. No houses nearby, no streetlights, just the road and the drop down to the shoreline. The engine was off. The only sound had been the faint movement of water below, barely audible through the closed windows. After the vibration, even that felt quieter. I sat still for a second, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe the car settling or a distant vehicle I couldn't see. I glanced at the rearview mirror again. That's when I noticed the glow. At first, I thought it was just a reflection, something from the dashboard or maybe the faint light from my phone screen. But it wasn't in the right place. It sat in the mirror like it was coming from outside, directly behind the car. A soft, dim light, not bright, more like a pale smear, slightly blurred. I turned in my seat and looked through the rear window. Nothing. Just darkness. The road behind me stretched out empty, fading into black. I looked back at the mirror. The glow was still there, centered. I leaned forward and adjusted the mirror slightly. The glow stayed in the same position relative to the mirror, not shifting like a normal reflection would. That didn't make sense. I adjusted it again. Same result. The glow stayed fixed. I felt that quiet unease start to build. Not fear, just the feeling that something wasn't behaving the way it should. I turned again and looked straight back through the rear window. Nothing. No light source, no movement. Just the outline of the road and the darkness beyond it. I looked back at the mirror. The glow pulsed slightly. Not a sharp change, just a subtle increase in brightness, then back down. I held still, watching it. After a few seconds, it did it again. I felt another vibration, softer this time, more like a low tremor. It ran through the seat and into my lower back. Then it stopped. The glow dimmed slightly. I swallowed and glanced at my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual out there, but it stood out now. I looked back at the mirror. The glow seemed a bit larger, not by much, just enough that I noticed it. I reached for the door handle, paused. Something about stepping out didn't feel right. I didn't know why. I just hesitated. Instead, I rolled the window down a few inches. Cold air came in. No sound, no hum, no movement. Nothing to match what I was seeing. I looked at the mirror again. The glow pulsed, stronger this time, and with it came that pressure. Not just in the seat, in my ears. A low, steady pressure like altitude change. I rubbed my jaw slightly, trying to clear it. It didn't go away. I turned again and looked through the rear window. Still nothing. No light, no source, just empty darkness. I looked back at the mirror. The glow was still there, and it didn't feel like it was reflecting something anymore. It felt like it was in the mirror. I adjusted it one more time. The glow stayed centered, perfectly fixed. I felt my breathing slow down without meaning to. Everything inside the car felt quieter. Even the faint ticking of the engine cooling seemed to fade. The glow pulsed again, and the vibration returned. Stronger. A steady, low tremor that lasted a couple of seconds, then stopped. The glow began to fade, not quickly, slowly, like it was moving further away. The edges softened, the brightness reduced, until it was barely visible. Then it was gone. I stared at the mirror. Nothing. Just the dark road behind me. I turned and looked through the rear window again. Still nothing. No movement. No light. I checked my phone. The signal came back. Full bars. I looked at the time. It didn't make sense. I was sure I'd only been sitting there for a few minutes. The phone said nearly 20 had passed. I sat there for a bit longer, not moving, waiting to see if anything else would happen. Nothing did. Eventually, I started the engine. The sound felt too loud at first, like it broke whatever quiet had been there. I pulled away slowly, checking the mirrors more than usual. The rear view showed nothing but the empty road. When I got back home, I parked in my driveway and sat there for a moment. I adjusted the mirror again. It felt slightly off. Not in a way I could explain, just not quite right. I tried to fix it, but it never seemed to sit the way it had before. And every now and then, when I check it while driving, I half expect to see that faint glow again, just sitting there where nothing should be. I was up late one night, just like I usually am when I'm trying to get some photos of the stars. I've always been into amateur astronomy and night photography, so it's not unusual for me to be outside with my camera around midnight or later. This particular night, the sky was clear, really clear, and the stars looked perfect, so I set up my tripod in the backyard and started snapping away. Between midnight and about 2 in the morning, I took a bunch of pictures, just pointing the camera straight up or at different parts of the sky. It was the kind of calm, quiet night where the only sounds were a few distant cars and some rustling leaves. I felt completely alone out there, but in a good way. I like that kind of solitude. The next day, I loaded the photos onto my computer to check them out. Most looked exactly like you'd expect. Sharp stars, some constellations, a few satellites caught as tiny lines of light moving across the frame. But then I noticed something odd. In every photo taken between midnight and 2, there was this blurred triangular shape. It wasn't a sharp outline or a clear object, more like a smudge or a faint shadow, always somewhere near the center or just off to one side. It didn't move or change shape much, just there in every single shot. The color was strange too, sort of a dull gray with a faint glow around the edges, but nothing that looked like a lens flare or any typical camera artifact I've seen before. At first, I figured it had to be some kind of camera issue, maybe a dirty lens or a sensor problem. So I cleaned everything carefully, checked my settings, even took some test shots around sunset and during the day. No triangular shapes, just normal pictures. The night after, I set the camera up again, trying to catch the same part of the sky. I took photos at the same intervals between midnight and 2. When I looked at those pictures the next day, there it was again, the same blurry triangle, same size and shape in roughly the same spot. I started paying closer attention that night while I was outside. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining things, but the feeling of being watched crept in slowly. Nothing obvious, no one standing in the shadows or anything, but the air got heavy in the backyard, like something was hovering just out of sight. I noticed the neighborhood was unusually quiet. No barking dogs, no distant traffic noises, just a strange, almost unnatural stillness. I glanced around a few times, but didn't see anyone. My phone was on silent, so no distractions, just the occasional click of the camera shutter and the low hum of my laptop inside. Then I started hearing it. A faint mechanical clicking sound. Not loud, more like something buried deep in the background noise of the night, but definitely there. It was steady, rhythmic, almost like a clock ticking, but more metallic. I tried to locate it, but it didn't get any closer or farther. It just stayed, steady and low. The clicking lasted for maybe 15 minutes. I told myself it was probably just something normal, a machine somewhere, maybe a generator in a neighbor's yard or a distant radio tower. But still, it didn't quite fit with how quiet everything else was. After a while, I put the camera down and went inside. I checked the photos again on my computer, just to make sure the triangle was still showing up. It was, in every shot from that time window. On the third night, I decided to bring my binoculars out with me and just watch the sky for a while, without the camera. The triangle shape wasn't visible to the naked eye or through the binoculars. The stars were perfectly normal. No blinking lights, no moving shapes, nothing unusual. Still, I kept feeling like something was nearby, just out of reach, like an invisible presence hanging above the treetops, watching quietly. When I got back inside, I noticed something else weird. My phone had a few new notifications, messages from people I didn't know. Just random numbers, and the messages were strange. A few symbols I didn't recognize, like scrambled letters or code, nothing readable. I deleted them, thinking it was spam, but then one more came in. This one was different. It was an audio file, no text, just a short clip. I listened to it. At first, there was static, then the same faint clicking sound I'd heard outside. Then, very quietly, a whisper. It was my own voice. But the word it said was something I didn't know, something that didn't make sense. It wasn't any language I recognized, just a soft, breathy syllable. I checked my phone logs to see if I'd called or recorded anything at that time. Nothing. I hadn't spoken to anyone in hours, hadn't used any apps that could have recorded sound. I started wondering if I was losing track of time or dreaming while awake, but nothing else felt off. My memory of the night was clear, except for some brief moments where I couldn't say what I was doing. The next day, I went back through the photos, the messages, the sound clip, trying to connect dots. The triangle shape on the pictures, the clicking sound, the strange message on my phone, all tied together somehow, but without any clear reason. I thought about showing the photos to a few friends, but I hesitated. I don't know if they'd believe me or just think it was a camera glitch or some prank. After that, the strange messages stopped. The clicking sound didn't come back, and the triangle shape disappeared from my photos. But the feeling stayed, the sense that something was there, watching, just beyond what I could see. I still look up at the stars sometimes, camera ready, hoping to catch it again, but it hasn't shown up since. It happened during my Thursday overnight shift about 3 years ago now. I was running the graveyard block at a small independent station outside Flagstaff. Midnight to 4 a.m., mostly pre-programmed stuff, low audience, very little live interaction. It was an easy gig, especially during the winter when the calls dropped off and the phone lines stayed mostly dead. That night started like any other. I got in around 11:30, checked the queue, queued up the playlists. Weather was clear but cold. I remember scraping frost off my windshield in the parking lot. We ran mostly classic rock and old school alt during the late shift, but I'd sneak in ambient stuff when the manager wasn't checking logs, just to keep myself from nodding off. The call came in a little after 2 a.m. I remember because I just faded out of a long instrumental track and was reaching for my coffee when the line blinked. I hadn't taken a single call all night. I figured it was a trucker or someone killing time, maybe looking for a request. I picked up and did the usual, "You're on the air, what can I play for you?" But there was no voice, just this high-pitched digital tone. Not static, not feedback. A weird, clean note, like something you'd hear from a modem if you're old enough to remember dial-up. I said hello again. Still nothing. Then the tone changed, dropped low and mechanical, like a deep hum with layers under it. Chirps clicking like automated signals or compressed data. It wasn't random either. It shifted in pulses, kind of rhythmic, but not in any pattern I could place. I took it off air and kept listening, just in case it was a prank, but it didn't sound like someone screwing around. It sounded too deliberate. Then, after maybe 30 seconds, the signal just stopped. Not a click or hang up, just gone. Dead line. I figured I'd toss on another track and think it through, but when I looked back at the console, all the meters were frozen. Dead air. No signal to the tower. I hadn't touched anything except the phone. I tried resetting the stream, then the automation software. Nothing worked. The mic channel was still hot, but the board wasn't feeding anything to the transmitter. Even my monitor feed had gone silent. I called our tech guy, first time I'd ever had to wake him during my shift. He didn't pick up, so I left a message and started rebooting the hardware manually. Took everything down, waited, brought it back up in stages. The signal came back eventually, around 6 or 7 minutes later, but that window of dead air, it was total. No static, just black silence. I checked the logs. Nothing registered during that time. The system showed continuous play as if the playlist had kept going, but no audio reached the board. And the weird part, the last song before the call, the one I remember fading out of, was still queued like it had never actually played. I went back to the recording archive. We had a digital logger that saved the entire broadcast in 5-hour blocks. I pulled the file for that night, jumped to just before the call. The file played fine. My voice came through introducing the track. I said the station ID. Everything was normal. Then came the point where I picked up the phone, and then nothing. Just total silence for the next 6 minutes. No tones, no hum, not even my voice. It was like the mic had cut out the moment I answered. The waveform was flat. I skipped ahead and the audio returned mid-track like nothing had happened. That was the part that really got under my skin. It wasn't that something strange happened live that could be chalked up to a glitch or interference or whatever, but it was gone from the log too, like it never existed. Like my side of the interaction had been erased. I checked the incoming call list. We used a basic caller ID system that time-stamped every ring. The screen showed a call at 2:11 a.m., number withheld. Duration, 47 seconds. I called it back. Got a fast, busy signal. The kind you hear when a line's been disconnected. I didn't talk about it the next day. I wrote up a generic note about a system hang and submitted it to the tech crew, but I didn't mention the tones or the signal drop. The manager didn't say anything, probably didn't even notice the gap. The rest of the week went normal, though I kept one eye on the phone console every night. Nothing else like that happened. Until the following Thursday. 2:08 a.m., the phone rang again. Same withheld number. I froze for a second, then answered without putting it on air. Same tone. High and steady at first, then it dropped into the layered mechanical hum. Almost identical to the first call, but this time it only lasted about 20 seconds. Then a click. An actual click. This time, and a voice. I don't know how else to say this, but it didn't sound human. Not robotic either. Just wrong. Like someone speaking through a filter they didn't fully understand. Words slurred into tones, clipped mid-syllable, no inflection. It said something like inbound, or at least that's what it sounded like, but with a weird delay between the syllables. Inbound. Then silence again. No broadcast cut this time. Everything stayed live. But my mic wasn't working for about a minute afterward. No one noticed, or at least no one called about it. I kept the music going and didn't take any more calls. I stayed in the booth until sunrise. I never got another call like that again. I kept watching the logs, kept recording backups of every shift. Nothing showed up. No more dropped signals. No more silence. Just that 1 week. 2 calls. Sometimes I wonder if it was some shortwave freak bouncing signals off the ionosphere, or some messed up satellite interference, but I don't buy that. Not with how quiet the line was, not with the dead air. There's nothing like it in the archives anymore, either. I copied the original files to a USB drive, but a few months later when I tried to play them back, the audio had degraded. Just a solid buzz now, like electrical interference, you can't hear anything. But I remember what I heard. I remember the feeling of something pushing into the thing, like it was in the signal, like using the broadcast itself, not just piggybacking on it, like it came through the silence. I was out in the backfield one afternoon putting in new fence posts. The old fence had seen better days. Posts rotted, wire sagging, and after the winter storms, a few sections had just fallen apart. I figured a weekend of work and I'd have it all fixed up again. I'd started early, and by mid-afternoon, I'd cleared the overgrown brush and pulled out the worst of the old posts. I was getting ready to dig holes for the new ones when I noticed something that made me stop. The old posts that were still standing, they weren't just leaning or broken like I expected. They were bent outward, away from the center of this patch of the field, in a near-perfect arc. At first, I thought maybe a big animal had knocked them down or something, but the bend was too smooth, too consistent. The curve was like someone had pushed them out from inside all at once. The circle the posts formed was about 25 to 30 feet across. The ground inside was just grass, nothing unusual. No footprints, no disturbed earth. I scratched my head and walked around trying to figure out what had caused it. There was no sign of a storm or flood damage there, and the rest of the field looked untouched. I figured I must have missed something the last time I looked at this fence, but I'd been out here just a few weeks earlier, and the posts had been standing straight, even if a little weathered. I walked the perimeter of the circle slowly. The posts curved outward like a dome had pushed against them from inside, but I couldn't find anything inside the ring. No holes, no weird markings, just that strange bending. It felt off, like the field had shifted, but only in that exact spot. I told my wife about it that evening, but she just said maybe it was old machinery or some kind of farming equipment I'd forgotten about. I thought about that, but the bend was too smooth and all the same direction. Machines tend to smash or break things unevenly, not bend everything like a bow. The next morning, I came back out to the circle early just to look at it in daylight. The air was still cool and the field smelled like wet earth and grass. When I got there, the posts looked the same, but the light made the bending more obvious. The wood was splintered in places, but there was no fresh damage, just old, weathered cracks. As I stood there, I started hearing this low hum. It wasn't loud, more like a vibration under the ground. I figured it was a tractor or some kind of machinery from a neighbor's farm, so I looked around. The nearest farm was a good distance away, and I couldn't see or hear anything moving. The hum faded after a few seconds. I went to the circle again the following night, just after sunset. I don't know why. I guess I wanted to see if the circle looked different in the dark or if anything else was going on. I brought a flashlight, but I didn't really expect to find anything. That night, the posts looked darker, the bends casting long shadows in the beam from my flashlight. I felt kind of exposed out there, but the field was quiet. Then something caught my eye. A faint glow coming from inside the circle, just beyond the bent posts. It wasn't bright, more like a soft, pale light hovering just above the grass. I froze and watched for a minute. The glow stayed in one spot, flickering slightly, but didn't grow or move toward me. It didn't seem like any kind of fire or flashlight, just light. I didn't hear any sounds from it, just that same low hum I'd heard before. I wanted to call out or get closer, but something made me hold back. I kept my distance, shining my flashlight around the circle, but there was nothing else there. Then the light disappeared slowly, like someone turned it off. I left the field that night with an uneasy feeling I can't really explain. When I got home, I checked my phone. No missed calls, no messages, but my battery was down more than I remembered. It felt like the signal was weaker than usual, too. The next day, I talked to a couple of neighbors, but no one else had seen or heard anything strange out by the fence. One of them mentioned how the weather had been weird lately, some days hotter than expected, others foggy in the morning, but no real storms or anything that could explain the bent posts. Over the next week, I kept going back to that spot at different times of day. Sometimes I'd hear the hum, sometimes I'd see the faint glow, but it was never consistent. No one else seemed to notice anything, and I started wondering if I was imagining it. One afternoon, while I was repairing a broken section of fence near the circle, I caught the scent of something strange in the air. It wasn't like anything I'd smelled before, metallic but not sharp, kind of sweet and faint, like burnt plastic mixed with something earthy. I looked around but couldn't find a source. The smell lingered just for a moment and then vanished. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept hearing small creaks from outside, like wood flexing or settling, but nothing that made sense, given how calm the night was. I got up a few times and checked the window facing the field. The moonlight made the bent posts look like shadows reaching out. At one point, I thought I saw a shape moving inside the circle, a quick flicker of something just beyond the tree line. When I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, it was gone. No footprints in the grass, nothing disturbed. A few days later, I noticed that one of the posts on the edge of the circle had shifted a little more. It was bent farther out than before. I didn't touch it. It just felt like whatever had bent those posts was still active somehow. That night, I left a camera set up, pointed at the circle. The next morning, I checked the footage. For hours, nothing happened, but right at 2:58 a.m., the camera picked up a faint glow near the center of the circle. It hovered and pulsed gently, then vanished at 3:05 a.m. I rewound the footage again and again. There was no sound on the recording, just the glow. The camera's internal clock matched the real time perfectly. I told a few friends who work in agriculture or land management, but no one could explain it. Some said it might be the effect of underground gas or something natural, but I doubted it. Nothing about that glow or the bends felt natural. One night, about 2 weeks after I first found the bent posts, I went out again with a flashlight. It was late, probably around midnight. As I walked into the circle, the air seemed heavier, thicker. I swear I could feel eyes on me, like something was watching from just beyond sight. The hum started again, low and steady, and the faint glow appeared near the center of the ring. I stood still, trying to make sense of it, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I pulled out my phone to take a picture. The screen flickered and went black. I tried turning it back on, but it wouldn't respond. I put it away and looked up. The glow was gone. I left the field quickly that night, but on the way back to the house, I thought I heard something moving in the bushes beside the road. I stopped and listened. Nothing. Since then, the circle hasn't changed much. The posts stay bent in that same arc, and the glow and hum come and go without pattern. I haven't touched the old fence anymore. Part of me wants to rip it all out and start fresh, but another part doesn't want to disturb it. I don't know what's happening out there. It doesn't seem dangerous, but it feels wrong. Like there's something just beneath the surface of the field, something watching and waiting. I'm still working around it, fixing what I can, but every time I'm near that circle, I feel uneasy, like I'm not alone. Whatever it is, it's there, silent, still, and somehow more than just a bent fence. I work for a small weather station just outside Flagstaff, Arizona. Nothing fancy, mostly gathering data from our weather balloons and sending reports to the university and some local agencies. The station is in a pretty remote spot, on a plateau surrounded by forest and desert. Last September, I was on the late afternoon shift, which means prepping the balloons for release just before dusk, then tracking them as they float up through the atmosphere. That day, I was alone at the station except for my dog, Juno. She's a border collie mix, smart as hell, and usually sticks close by. The weather was clear, a bit chilly, with that dry desert air that feels crisp but doesn't bite like snow. The sun was starting to drop low behind the San Francisco peaks, turning the sky orange and purple. I launched the balloon around 6:10 p.m., like I always do. It's one of those big latex ones filled with helium, with a small package attached beneath it. The camera and some sensors recording temperature, pressure, humidity, and sending it back to us in real time. The balloon floats up slowly, sometimes going as high as 30 kilometers before bursting and falling back. As usual, I switched on the receiver and the monitor showing the camera's live feed. The image was grainy, black and white, but it gave a decent look at what the balloon was passing over. I expected to see the dark outline of the forest and patches of desert moving beneath it as it rose. But then something caught my eye. At about 5,000 meters altitude, roughly 3 kilometers above the ground, there was this dark shape moving alongside the balloon, matching its altitude and speed almost perfectly. At first, I thought it was a bird, maybe a hawk or an eagle, since they sometimes fly high in those parts. But the shape didn't look right. It was too big, too solid looking, and it didn't flap wings or change direction erratically. It just paced the balloon, staying about 200 meters away horizontally, sliding along the same course. I kept watching. Juno sat nearby, eyes fixed on me, probably sensing my distraction. Minutes passed. 10 minutes. 15. The object never veered off. No change in altitude, no speed change. It just glided beside the balloon, moving steadily over the darkening landscape below. I called my supervisor Mark on the radio, told him what I was seeing, and asked if he could check from the other station a few miles east. He said he wasn't getting any signals or anything unusual on their equipment. I thought maybe it was just something that only showed up on the camera feed. At 20 minutes, the object suddenly accelerated straight up. It moved fast, faster than anything I'd seen in the sky around there. The balloon camera's view went fuzzy as the distance grew. The object disappeared into the upper atmosphere in seconds, too quickly to track beyond a certain point. The balloon kept rising until it popped as expected, and I watched the sensors report data all the way to the burst. Nothing else showed up on the feed after the object vanished. That night, back at the station, I downloaded all the footage and data. When I replayed the video on my laptop, the object was there, pacing right alongside the balloon, clearly visible as a dark oval shape against the sky. No wings, no lights, just moving smoothly. But the weird thing is, the GPS data from the balloon didn't show any disturbances. Nothing on radar scans from nearby stations. I ran the data through every filter and software we have, and nothing explained it. I showed the video to Mark the next day. He shrugged and said maybe it was a rare weather phenomenon, a trick of light or shadow, but neither of us could find a solid explanation. Since then, I've watched every balloon launch closely, hoping to catch something similar. Nothing. Just the usual slow rise, pop, and data dump. Sometimes I think about how precise that thing was, matching the balloon's altitude and speed for so long without making a sound or a visible signature beyond what the camera caught, and how suddenly it shot straight up, faster than anything I've ever seen. Juno still likes to follow me out to the launch site, especially at dusk. She stares into the sky more than usual, like she remembers something I don't. I keep the footage saved, but I don't show it around. Most people at the station think I'm nuts when I mention it, and honestly, I'm not sure what I saw either. I noticed the line because it didn't match anything in the room. I was lying on my back, staring at the wall across from my bed. It was late, probably past 2 a.m. I hadn't checked the time in a while, but I couldn't sleep. Just one of those nights where your brain won't shut off. My room faces the backyard. There's a small window with blinds, and usually you get a little bit of streetlight bleeding through from the side, just enough to see shapes. But this wasn't that. This was a thin line, straight, faint, but clearly there. It stretched vertically along the wall, about a foot wide, like a narrow beam of light that had been flattened. At first, I thought maybe a car had turned down the street and the headlights were catching the window at a weird angle. But it wasn't moving the way headlights do. It was too slow. I stayed still, watching it. The line crept sideways across the wall, not jittery, not flickering, just a steady, smooth motion, like it was being dragged across the surface. I pushed myself up slightly on my elbows. The room stayed quiet, no sound of a car passing, no engine, no tires on pavement, nothing, just that line of light moving. It reached the corner where the wall meets the ceiling. Then it continued upward. That's when it started to feel wrong. Light doesn't usually behave like that. If it was coming through the window, it should have stretched and distorted as it climbed. But it didn't. It kept the same shape, same width, same intensity, like it wasn't coming from outside at all. I swung my legs over the side of the bed but didn't stand up yet, just sat there, watching. The line slid onto the ceiling, still straight, still even. It moved slowly across the ceiling now, heading toward the center of the room. I glanced at the window. The blinds hadn't moved. No shifting shadows, no passing light from outside. I looked back at the ceiling. The line was still there, still moving. I stood up this time, slowly, like I didn't want to disturb anything. The floor felt cold under my feet. I took a few steps closer, standing directly under it. The light didn't react, didn't change brightness, didn't flicker. It just kept going. I reached up slightly, not touching it, just holding my hand near where it passed. There was no warmth, no sensation at all. It wasn't like standing in sunlight or under a lamp. It felt like nothing. That made it worse. I pulled my hand back. The line continued moving. It crossed over the center of the ceiling now. Then it started to fade. Not all at once, gradually, like someone was dimming it. The edges softened first, then the brightness dropped. Within a couple seconds, it was gone. The room went back to how it had been before. Dark. Still. I stood there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to come back. Nothing did. I walked over to the window and pulled the blinds up slightly. Outside was quiet. The backyard was dark. No lights, no cars, nothing that could have caused it. I let the blinds fall back into place, turned around. The room looked normal again, but something felt off. I couldn't explain it. I got back into bed, but stayed sitting up, listening, trying to catch any sound I might have missed. After a minute or two, I checked my phone. 2:14 a.m. That seemed about right. Maybe a little later than I expected, but close enough. I set it down on the nightstand. Then I noticed something else. The room smelled different, faint, almost like after a thunderstorm, that sharp, clean smell. I sat there, trying to place it. It wasn't strong, just enough to notice. I got up again and walked toward the window. The smell seemed stronger near it. I pulled the blinds back again. Still nothing outside, just darkness. I opened the window slightly. Cool air came in, normal air, no smell. I closed it again, turned back toward the room. That's when I saw it again. Not on the wall, on the floor this time. A faint line near the foot of the bed. I froze. It was the same shape, same width, same soft glow, but it wasn't moving. Not yet. I didn't move either, just watched. After a few seconds, it started to shift, slowly, sliding across the floor, toward the wall. I took a step back. My heart was beating faster now. The line reached the base of the wall, then climbed, same as before. No distortion, no change in shape, just moving upward. I felt that tightness in my chest again, that sense that something was happening just outside of what I could understand. I looked at the window again. Still nothing, no source, no explanation. I turned back. The line had reached halfway up the wall. Then it stopped. Just for a second, completely still. Then it dimmed, faster this time. Within a second, it was gone. The room was dark again. I stood there, not moving, waiting. Nothing came back. After a while, I got back into bed. I didn't lie down right away, just sat there, staring at the wall where it had been. Eventually, I checked my phone again. 2:26 a.m. I frowned. That didn't make sense. It hadn't felt like 12 minutes, maybe 3 or 4. I set the phone down slowly, lay back, closed my eyes. I didn't fall asleep right away. I kept thinking about the way the light moved, too steady, too controlled, and how it didn't seem to come from anywhere. At some point, I must have drifted off, because when I woke up, it was morning. Sunlight coming through the window normally. Everything looked fine. But when I got up and looked at the wall across from my bed, there was something I didn't recognize at first. A faint, straight mark, barely visible, running vertically, exactly where the light had first appeared. The power went out right as I was rinsing a plate. No warning, just everything cutting to black at once. The fridge hum stopped, the overhead lights snapped off, even the little standby light on the microwave disappeared. I stood there for a second with my hands in the sink, waiting for it to come back. Sometimes it does that around here when the weather's bad, but it didn't. I looked out the kitchen window. The whole street was dark. No porch lights, no TV glow through windows. Just this faint orange from the sky, like the usual light pollution. It had been storming earlier that evening. Not heavy, just steady rain and low clouds. By the time the power went out, the rain had mostly stopped, but everything was still wet. I could hear water dripping off the gutter outside. I grabbed my phone off the counter and turned the flashlight on. No signal. That wasn't totally unusual during outages, but it still added to the feeling. I walked into the living room, checking if anything had tripped inside. Fuse box looked fine, no weird smells, nothing obvious. The house just felt empty without the background noise. No fridge, no clock ticking, nothing. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The air was damp and cool, the kind of quiet you get after rain, but heavier. A couple houses down, I saw someone else outside, my neighbor Rena. She was standing at the end of her driveway, looking up at the sky. "Yours out too?" I called. "Yeah," she said. "Whole street, I think." Her voice sounded flat, like it didn't carry properly. I stepped off the porch and walked toward her. As I got closer, I noticed she wasn't just looking up randomly. She was focused on one spot. I followed her gaze. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just clouds, low and thick, kind of reflecting the usual city glow. Then I noticed the color. There was a patch of sky, maybe directly above the middle of the street, that looked slightly off. Faintly blue. Not bright, not glowing like a light source, just tinted, like someone had layered a soft blue filter over that section of clouds. "Do you see that?" she said. "What is that?" She didn't answer. We both just stood there watching it. It didn't move with the clouds. That's what stood out first. The rest of the sky was shifting slowly like you'd expect after rain, but that blue patch stayed fixed. I stepped a little further into the road to get a better angle. The moment I did, I felt something strange under my feet. A faint vibration. Not strong, not like something shaking the ground. More like a low buzz, similar to standing near heavy machinery far away. I paused, testing it by shifting my weight. It was definitely there. "Can you feel that?" I asked. Rena hesitated. "Feel what?" "Like, the ground. Is it vibrating?" She stepped forward a bit, then stopped. "Yeah, I think so." We both went quiet again. The blue patch in the sky seemed to deepen slightly. Still faint, but more noticeable now that we were focused on it. I realized something else. There were no other lights anywhere. Not just the street. The entire horizon was dark. No distant glow from town, no flickering from other neighborhoods. It was like everything for miles had gone out. That didn't seem right. The vibration got a little stronger. I could feel it in my chest now, not just through my shoes. Rena wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't like this." "Probably just a transformer or something," I said, but it didn't sound convincing even to me. The air felt heavier, like before a storm, but there were no clouds building. No wind either. Then the blue patch changed. It didn't expand exactly. It just sharpened. The edges became more defined, like it was separating from the rest of the sky. And for a second, I thought I saw depth to it, not like a hole or anything obvious, just a sense that it wasn't flat like the clouds around it. I squinted, trying to focus. That's when the vibration peaked. It wasn't loud, but it was intense. My ears started to feel pressured, like I needed to pop them. Rena stepped back suddenly. "Okay, no, that's..." She didn't finish. The blue light brightened. Not suddenly, not like a flash. Just a quick, smooth increase, like someone turning up a dimmer switch. For maybe 3 or 4 seconds, the whole street was tinted blue. Not illuminated exactly. Shadows were still there, but everything had that color to it. The houses, the road, even Rena's face. During that moment, I noticed something above us. Shapes. Not solid, not clear, but something moved across that blue patch. Large, slow, like shadows passing behind frosted glass. I couldn't make out edges or details, just movement. My stomach dropped. I took a step back without thinking. The vibration held steady, almost like it was waiting. Then it all stopped. The blue faded instantly, like it had been switched off. The vibration cut out at the same time, and a second later, the power came back. Every house lit up at once. Streetlights flickered on. The hum of electricity filled the air again. It was so sudden it made me flinch. Rena let out a shaky laugh. "What the hell was that?" I didn't answer. I was still looking at the sky. It was normal again. Just low clouds reflecting the usual orange glow. No blue, no shapes. Just regular night. We stood there for a bit longer, but nothing else happened. Eventually, she went back inside. I did the same. The house felt loud again with everything running. I checked my phone. Still no signal for a minute or two. Then it came back. There were no alerts, no messages about outages or anything unusual. The next day, I asked a couple other neighbors if they saw anything. Most of them just mentioned the power cut. One guy, Malik, said his lights flickered twice before going out, but that was it. No one mentioned the sky. Later that afternoon, I walked out into the street again, just standing roughly where I had been. Everything looked completely normal, but when I looked down, I noticed something odd on the pavement. A faint discoloration, like a wide patch where the surface looked slightly dulled compared to the rest. It stretched across part of the road, right under where that blue patch had been. I rubbed my shoe over it, thinking maybe it was just leftover moisture or oil. It didn't change, it wasn't anything obvious. You'd walk right over it without noticing. But it was there. That night, the power stayed on. Everything was normal. Except every now and then, usually when it got really quiet, I'd feel that same faint vibration through the floor for a second or two. Not strong enough to be sure, just enough to make me stop and listen. I noticed it in my chest before I noticed it in my ears. I was sitting in the living room of my apartment just past 1 a.m. watching something, half paying attention. It was one of those nights where everything felt quiet in a normal way. No traffic outside, no voices from the neighbors, just the usual low hum of appliances and the occasional creak from the building settling. Then something changed. At first I thought my heart was beating weird. There was this low, steady pressure, like a vibration, but not exactly a sound. It sat right in the middle of my chest, like when a subwoofer is too close and you feel it more than hear it. I muted the TV. The room went silent, but the feeling stayed. That's when I realized it wasn't internal. It was coming from outside. I stood up slowly. The pressure didn't get louder or softer, but it became easier to notice once I focused on it. It wasn't rhythmic like a machine or engine. It was constant. Flat, like a tone too low to actually hear. I walked toward the window. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the faint glow of the streetlight through them. The pressure didn't change. If anything, it felt slightly stronger near the window. I reached out and pulled the curtain aside. Outside, everything looked normal. The street was empty. A row of parked cars, the same streetlight casting that dull yellow glow onto the pavement. Nothing moving. I opened the window a few inches. Cool night air slipped in. The pressure stayed exactly the same. That was the part that didn't make sense. If it was coming from outside, it should have changed when I opened the window. Gotten clearer, louder, but it didn't. It felt the same, like it wasn't traveling through the air at all. I stood there for a minute, trying to figure it out. Then I noticed something else. The usual background noises were gone. No distant traffic, no hum from other apartments. Even the faint buzz from the streetlight seemed quieter, like everything else had been pushed down underneath that low pressure. I stepped back from the window. The feeling stayed with me. I checked the time on my phone. 1:14 a.m. I don't know why I did that. It just felt important to mark it. I walked toward the front door. There was a moment where I hesitated with my hand on the knob. Not because I was scared, more because I had this weird expectation that something would be different on the other side. I opened the door. The moment I stepped outside, it stopped completely. No fade, no gradual drop, just gone. The air felt normal again, light, quiet in a regular way. I stood there on the small concrete landing outside my apartment, looking up and down the street. Everything looked the same as it had through the window. Still, empty. But now I could hear things again. A car somewhere far off, wind moving lightly through the trees, even the faint electrical buzz of the streetlight. I stepped fully outside and let the door close behind me. The pressure didn't come back. I walked a few steps out toward the sidewalk. The night felt normal. I looked up at the sky, clear. Stars scattered across it. Nothing unusual. I stayed there for maybe a minute, just listening. Everything stayed the same. Then I turned around and went back inside. The moment the door closed behind me, the pressure returned. Instant, like flipping a switch. It hit my chest again, that same low, steady hum I couldn't actually hear. I froze in the entryway. That didn't make sense. I opened the door again, stepped outside. Gone. Stepped back in, back again. I repeated it once more just to be sure. Outside, nothing. Inside, it was there. I stood there for a while, halfway between the door and the living room, trying to figure out what could cause something like that. It didn't feel like sound. It didn't behave like sound. I walked back toward the window. The pressure stayed with me. I looked up at the ceiling. There was nothing there. Just the same off-white paint, the same light fixture. but the feeling seemed stronger when I stood directly under it. Not by much, just enough to notice. I moved a few steps to the side, slightly less, back under it, stronger again. I stayed there for a few seconds, standing still, looking up. The pressure didn't change, didn't pulse, didn't shift, just stayed constant. Then just for a second it stopped. I hadn't moved, I hadn't done anything, it just cut out. The silence that followed felt deeper than before. Then it came back, same intensity, same steady presence. I checked the time again, 1:22 a.m. That caught me off guard. I was sure I hadn't been standing there that long. It felt like a few minutes at most. I went back to the couch and sat down. The pressure stayed. I turned the TV back on, but the sound felt distant compared to it. Eventually, after a while, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, it was morning. Sunlight filled the room. Everything felt normal. No pressure, no hum. I got up and went about my day like usual. Around the same time, I found myself standing near the door again, waiting, listening. And just as I was about to convince myself it wasn't going to happen again, I felt it. That same low, steady pressure settling into my chest. And without thinking, I reached for the door. I saw the headlights before I saw the road. It was early morning, just before sunrise, and I was driving through a stretch of back roads in western Pennsylvania. I'd left my sister Dana's place around 5 a.m. to beat traffic, but I didn't expect the fog. It rolled in fast. 1 minute the road was clear, the next it was like driving into a wall of gray. I slowed down immediately. The fog was thick enough that my headlights just bounced back at me, lighting up the air instead of the road. Everything beyond maybe 20 feet was swallowed. I kept both hands on the wheel, leaning forward slightly, trying to focus on the faint outline of the center line. The world shrank down to just that narrow slice of pavement. No houses, no trees, just fog. Then I saw them, 2 points of light ahead, faint at first, barely visible through the haze. I assumed it was another car coming toward me. That was normal. The road wasn't busy, but it wasn't empty either. I eased my foot off the gas a little more. The lights grew brighter as I got closer, but something felt off. They weren't moving the way they should. On a straight road like that, oncoming headlights usually shift slightly as the car approaches, the angle changing with distance. These didn't. They stayed fixed, perfectly aligned. I squinted through the windshield. The fog distorted everything, but I could still make out that the lights were higher than they should be. Not by much, just enough to notice. I slowed down further. Now I was creeping along at maybe 15 miles an hour. The headlights stayed in place. They didn't get noticeably closer. Didn't drift, didn't dip or rise. Just hovered there in the fog. I tapped the brake lightly. The car slowed even more. I leaned forward, trying to see if there was a vehicle behind the lights. There wasn't. At least, I couldn't see one. Just the lights themselves, floating in the gray. I rolled down my window slightly. Cold, damp air filled the car. The fog smelled faintly earthy, like wet ground and leaves. I listened for an engine. Nothing. No hum, no tires on pavement, just silence. I looked back at the lights. Still there, still hovering. I came to a complete stop. The car idled quietly. The lights didn't react. They didn't brighten or dim. They didn't move at all. I checked my mirrors out of habit. Nothing behind me, just more fog. When I looked forward again, the lights seemed slightly closer, or maybe I was just imagining it. I couldn't tell. I sat there for a few seconds debating whether to turn around, but the road was too narrow for that without backing up a long way, and I didn't like the idea of reversing in that fog. So I made a decision. I eased the car forward again, slowly, very slowly. The headlights stayed fixed. As I got closer, I realized something else. They weren't level with the road. They were above it. Maybe 3 or 4 feet higher than where headlights should be. That's when the tight feeling in my chest started. I kept moving forward. The fog seemed to thin slightly, not clearing completely, but enough that I could see a little more of the space around the lights. There was no outline of a car, no shape, just the lights, suspended in midair. I stopped again, closer this time, maybe 30 feet away. I stared at them, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. They didn't flicker, didn't blink, just a steady, dull white. I reached over and turned off my headlights. The road in front of me disappeared into darkness, but the floating lights remained, unchanged. That's when the fog shifted. It didn't clear all at once, it just thinned enough in that specific spot. For a brief second, I could see the road beneath the lights. Empty. Nothing there. No vehicle. No structure. Just pavement. The lights hovered above it. Then, as the fog continued to shift, the lights dimmed, not fading out gradually, just becoming less visible as the air cleared. Within a few seconds, they were gone. Completely. The fog thinned enough that I could see farther down the road. There was nothing there. No car, no taillights driving away, no turnoff where something could have gone. Just an empty stretch of road disappearing into the distance. I sat there for a moment, my headlights still off, then I turned them back on. The beam cut through what was left of the fog. The road looked normal again. I drove forward slowly, passing the spot where the lights had been. There was nothing unusual about it, just asphalt, a faded center line, grass along the edges. I kept going. The fog gradually thinned as I drove farther. By the time I reached the next intersection, it had almost cleared completely. I checked the clock on the dashboard. 5:32 a.m. That made me pause. I was sure it had been around 5:10 when I first hit the fog. The stretch of road I'd been on shouldn't have taken that long. I tried to replay what had just happened, how long I'd been sitting there watching the lights. It didn't feel like 20 minutes, more like a few minutes at most. I drove the rest of the way home without seeing anything else. But every time another car approached from the opposite direction, I found myself watching the headlights carefully, making sure they were attached to something. And when I finally pulled into my driveway and shut off the engine, I sat there for a minute, staring down the empty street, half expecting to see those same two lights hanging there in the distance. But the road stayed empty. The highway message board started glitching before anything showed up in the sky. I worked overnight maintenance for the State Transportation Department in northern Arizona. My job was mostly driving between the electronic message signs along a stretch of highway that ran through miles of desert. Those signs are the big digital boards that warn drivers about road work, accidents, or weather conditions. Most nights were quiet. A few trucks passing through, maybe a car every few minutes, but mostly just empty road and desert wind. My name's Scott Ramirez. I'd been doing that shift for about 6 months when this happened. It was around 2:40 in the morning when the first signs started flashing nonsense. I was parked on the shoulder near mile marker 118 when the message board ahead of me flickered. Normally, it just displayed road work ahead during my shift, but the words disappeared. The board filled with random symbols and blocks of light. Then it went blank. I thought the controller box had failed. But before I could step out of the truck, the next sign down the highway flickered too, then the one behind me. 3 message boards went dark at the same time. The truck radio crackled and cut out. The desert wind stopped. That part hit me first. The wind out there almost never dies completely. But suddenly the dust along the shoulder wasn't moving. The weeds beside the road were still. I stepped out of the truck and looked up. The stars above the highway looked distorted. A wide section of sky bent inward toward the center of something invisible drifting across the night. The light from the stars curved like it was passing through glass. The distortion moved slowly along the direction of the highway. As it passed overhead, the streetlights along the road dimmed slightly. The metal signposts beside the road ticked softly like they were adjusting under pressure. The distortion stopped above the highway for a few seconds. Then the asphalt lit up faintly. Not bright, just a pale glow washing across the road and the desert around it. Every reflector on the road shimmered under the light. Then the glow vanished. The distortion shot across the sky and disappeared beyond the hills faster than anything I'd ever seen. The wind returned instantly. Dust began drifting across the road again. The truck radio blasted back to life. The highway signs rebooted. Everything returned to normal, except for the car. A black sedan sat parked on the shoulder behind my truck. I hadn't heard it arrive. 2 men stood beside it. Both wore black suits, white shirts, black ties, no jackets even though the desert air had turned colder. One of them was tall with dark hair combed straight back. The other had a broader build and pale skin that looked almost gray under the highway lights. They were watching the road. The tall one walked toward me. "You observed the passage," he said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, I replied slowly. What was that thing? The shorter man glanced up toward the sky. A transit object, he said. That thing bent the stars. Yes. The way he said it made my stomach tighten. So you know what it was. Neither of them confirmed it. Instead, the tall man looked toward the digital message sign. You also noticed the system interruption, he said. The boards glitched. That's common during those events. For what events? He didn't answer. The shorter man stepped closer to the edge of the highway and looked down the empty road. You're the only technician assigned to this section tonight, he said. How do you know that? We checked the maintenance schedule. That response made me uneasy. You guys from the transportation department, I asked. No. Military? No. Then who are you? The tall man paused before answering. We observe unusual crossings. Crossings of what? He looked up at the sky again. Things that move through this region. That's not helpful. It's accurate. The wind pushed dust across the highway again. A truck passed far down the road, its headlights sweeping across the desert. I looked back toward the sky where the distortion had vanished. So what exactly flew over this highway? The two men exchanged a quick glance. Then the shorter one said quietly, something traveling far beyond this place. The tall man stepped back toward the sedan. You should log the sign malfunction as routine electrical interference, he said. That's not what caused it. It will be the explanation that remains. I crossed my arms. What happens if that thing comes back? He paused before getting into the car. Then he said softly, it doesn't repeat the same crossing. Both men got into the sedan. The engine started quietly. As the car rolled onto the highway and disappeared into the darkness, the shorter man lowered the window. You lost about 40 seconds during the passage, he said. I was standing here the whole time. Time compresses near certain events. The sedan vanished down the empty highway. Later that morning, when I checked the sign controller logs, every message board had shut down for exactly 40 seconds. But according to the timestamp, that shutdown started almost a minute before the first sign ever glitched. The first thing I noticed was the birds. I was delivering packages that morning, one of the rural routes outside Redding, California. The job wasn't glamorous. Just driving a white van down long stretches of road where houses were half a mile apart and people left snacks out for the drivers. It was late winter, one of those pale gray mornings where the fog hangs low over the fields, but the sun keeps trying to break through. I had stopped at a cattle gate to drop off a small box for a rancher named Eli Navarro. His mailbox was mounted on a wooden post beside the gravel road. The place was quiet except for the wind moving through dry grass and a distant tractor somewhere in the valley. Normally there were birds everywhere out there, starlings, crows, sometimes hawks circling above the hills. That morning there weren't any. It wasn't something I consciously noticed at first. It was more like a feeling that the air was missing a layer of sound. No wings, no chirping, nothing. I put the package in the mailbox and turned back toward the van. That's when the shadow passed over the road. Not a fast shadow, like a plane moving overhead. It was slower and broader, like something enormous gliding between the sun and the ground. I looked up immediately. There was nothing there, just a sheet of fog thinning out over the hills. The shadow moved again across the gravel road, stretching along the fence line. It was so wide it covered the entire field for a moment. Then it drifted away and vanished. I stood there staring at the sky longer than I probably should have. My first thought was that a cloud had moved across the sun, but the sky above me was completely clear except for the fog layer sitting lower near the hills. No cloud overhead, no airplane sound, nothing. The birds were still gone. I got back in the van and started driving again, but the feeling stuck with me. That quiet, hollow atmosphere like something had passed through and pulled the sound with it. About 5 minutes later, I turned onto a narrow road that cut between two long cattle pastures. That's when my GPS froze. The screen showed my location stuck in the middle of the previous road even though I'd already turned. The map didn't move with the van anymore. I tapped the screen a couple times. Nothing changed. Then the radio cut out. Not static, just silence. The engine kept running normally, but everything electronic seemed to stall at once. The quiet inside the van felt thick. As I drove farther down the road, I noticed something else. The cattle were all standing still. Dozens of them scattered across the pasture, but every single one had its head raised toward the sky. None of them were eating, none of them were moving, just staring upward. I slowed the van almost to a crawl. The fog had started lifting a little, and I could see the sky clearly now. That's when I saw the distortion. At first it looked like heat waves rising off asphalt, except this was high above the fields. A ripple in the sky, barely visible, like transparent glass bending the light around it. It stretched across a long section of air, maybe a few hundred feet above the ground. The ripple moved slowly across the valley. As it passed over the cattle, the sunlight dimmed slightly again. Not completely dark, just duller. My heart started beating harder. I reached for my phone to record it. The screen lit up for a second, then shut off. Battery dead. It had been almost full 5 minutes earlier. The distortion slid across the sky for another few seconds. Then it was gone. The sunlight returned to normal. The cattle immediately lowered their heads and went back to grazing like nothing had happened. My radio suddenly popped back on with a loud burst of static that made me flinch. The GPS map snapped forward and corrected my location. Everything in the van went back to normal. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Then I saw the car. It was parked on the side of the road about 50 yards ahead, a black sedan, clean, polished, completely out of place on that dusty farm road. 2 men stood beside it. Both wore black suits, black jackets, black ties, white shirts. No hats, no coats despite the cool morning air. They weren't talking. They were watching my van approach. I slowed down and stopped a few yards away. Neither of them waved or signaled. They just stood there calmly like they had been waiting. I rolled down the window. "You guys need help?" I asked. The taller one stepped forward. His expression was neutral, almost blank. "Did you observe anything unusual just now?" he asked. The question made my stomach tighten. Like what? "Any changes in the sky?" I hesitated. The shorter man leaned against the sedan, arms folded, watching me carefully. "Maybe," I said. The tall man nodded slightly. "Atmospheric distortion," he said. "That didn't look like weather." He smiled politely. "Many things in the atmosphere appear unusual from ground level. You two meteorologists?" "No." "Then who are you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black notebook. He wrote something quickly without looking away from me. Then he closed it. "You deliver packages along this route every day?" he asked. "Most mornings." He nodded again, like that confirmed something. "You should take a different road tomorrow," he said. "Why?" "Temporary testing." "What kind of testing?" The shorter man finally spoke. "Nothing that concerns you." That answer annoyed me. "You guys shut down my GPS and radio for your testing?" The tall man shook his head. "Those effects were incidental." He stepped back toward the sedan. Before getting in, he looked at me one more time. "Sometimes the sky behaves in ways that are better not examined too closely." The shorter man opened the passenger door. "You didn't see anything that requires reporting," he added calmly. Then both of them got into the car. The engine started quietly. They drove past my van and continued down the road toward the hills. Within seconds, the sedan disappeared behind a bend in the fence line. I waited there for a minute before pulling away. The rest of my deliveries went normally. But every time I passed an open field that day, I caught myself looking up, watching the sky, just in case it moved again. I noticed the sky first because I run the same trail almost every night, and the sky is usually the only thing that changes. My name's Aaron Delaney. I was 29 at the time and working late shifts at a warehouse outside Flagstaff. Running after work had become a routine thing, mostly to clear my head after 10 hours of forklifts and fluorescent lights. There's a trail that loops around a dry canyon about 15 minutes outside town. Hardly anyone goes there after dark. It's not dangerous or anything, just empty desert and juniper trees. That night was colder than usual. Early winter. No moon. The air had that dry sharpness where every breath feels clean but a little painful in your chest. I parked my car at the gravel lot around 11:20 p.m. There were no other cars there. Just my old Civic and the faint outline of the trailhead sign that someone had covered in stickers. I remember the stars being really clear when I stepped out. Arizona sky. You could see the Milky Way stretched across like dust. I put my earbuds in but didn't turn music on right away. Sometimes I liked hearing the desert at night. The wind moves differently out there, long, slow pushes through the brush. The first mile was normal, gravel crunching under my shoes, my breath fogging a little in the cold. A few distant coyote sounds way out in the valley. Then the wind stopped. It didn't fade or die down. It just stopped all at once, like someone shut a door. I slowed a little because the quiet felt strange. Desert quiet is already pretty deep, but this was heavier. No brush moving, no insects, just the sound of my own shoes. That's when I noticed the stars. At first, it looked like my eyes adjusting. Sometimes when you run at night, your vision does weird things with light, but this wasn't that. A small section of sky above the canyon, maybe the size of a dinner plate if you held it at arm's length, shifted slightly. Not fast, just slid. It was subtle enough that if you weren't staring at the stars, you'd miss it. But I'd been looking straight up while catching my breath, and suddenly the star pattern didn't match where it had been a second earlier. I blinked and stared harder. The stars outside that patch stayed perfectly still. The rest of the sky looked normal, but that small section had moved a little to the left, like someone had taken a cutout piece of sky and nudged it. I laughed quietly because my first thought was that I was dizzy. I started jogging again. The trail curved along the canyon ridge, and the sky stayed visible through the gaps in the trees. I kept glancing up at the same patch of stars. A minute passed. Then it shifted again, this time downward. Not the stars themselves moving across the sky the way they normally do over hours. This was different. The pattern stayed intact, like a photograph sliding across glass. I slowed to a walk. I tried to focus on one bright star near the edge of the moving section. It drifted slightly and then stopped again. The desert stayed completely silent. Even the coyotes had stopped. I took my earbuds out and listened. Nothing. It felt like the air itself had thickened. For a few seconds, I wondered if there was some kind of atmospheric distortion happening. Heat layers sometimes bend light weirdly. But it was freezing out there. No heat shimmer. Then something else happened. The moving patch of sky seemed to dim, not disappear, just lose brightness, like something large had passed between the stars and the ground. I couldn't see any shape, no edges or outline, but the stars inside that section grew faint for maybe 2 seconds. Then they returned to normal. The pattern slid once more, this time slowly upward. I stood there watching for maybe a full minute. My heart rate had dropped from the run, but I could feel a weird tightness in my chest. Eventually, the patch stopped moving entirely. The stars stayed exactly where they were. The wind returned suddenly, pushing through the brush again. It was like someone had pressed play on the environment. I shook my head and started jogging again, faster this time. I finished the rest of the loop without looking up again. The trail ended at the same gravel lot where I'd parked. It took me about 35 minutes to run the loop. My car was the only vehicle there when I left, and it was still the only one when I got back. Except 2 men were leaning against it. I saw them from about 20 yards away. At first, I thought maybe they were cops. The trail technically closes at dusk, and sometimes rangers swing by to tell people to leave. But these guys didn't look like rangers. They wore black suits. Actual suits. Black jackets, black pants, white shirts, thin black ties. Both had dark sunglasses on, even though it was almost midnight. They stood on either side of my car like they owned it. The taller one had his arms folded. The other had his hands resting on the roof. Neither of them moved when I approached. I slowed to a walk about 10 feet away. That's my car, I said. The taller man tilted his head slightly. We know, he said. His voice was calm, not threatening, just flat. I waited for them to move. They didn't. The shorter one pushed off the roof of my car and stepped closer. Did you enjoy the illusion? He asked. For a second, I didn't understand what he meant. Sorry? The sky, he said. You were looking at it. My stomach tightened. You guys were watching me? We were observing, the tall one said. Observing what? He didn't answer immediately. He looked past me toward the canyon trail like he expected someone else to walk out of the darkness. Then he said, It's not something people usually notice. I laughed nervously. You mean the stars moving? Neither of them reacted. The shorter man looked at the sky above the parking lot. You noticed the distortion, he said. Yeah, I said slowly. What was that? Neither of them answered right away. The wind moved through the trees again and rattled the trail sign. Finally, the tall one spoke. An optical effect, he said. That doesn't make sense, I said. It doesn't need to. The shorter man studied my face like he was trying to memorize it. How often do you run here? He asked. Most nights. After work? Yeah. He nodded slightly, like that information meant something. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small notepad. He wrote something quickly and tore the page out. He didn't hand it to me. He just folded it and slipped it back into his pocket. You should consider running somewhere else for a while, he said. Why? He looked at the tall man briefly before answering. Maintenance, he said. That's not an answer.